The post had everything you'd want: GPS coordinates, directions from the nearest highway, photos of the clearing from every angle. A crystal clear creek, a natural fire pit ringed with stones, flat ground for tents, and mountains framing it all like something off a postcard. 47 upvotes, a dozen comments, every one of them glowing. Best spot I've ever camped. Had it completely to ourselves, already planning a return trip. We found it on a Thursday night, and by Saturday morning we were packed. Me, Danny, and Zeph. Danny's real name is Daniel, but nobody's called him that since middle school. Zeph is short for Severin, the kind of name that sounds made up but isn't. The three of us had done a camping trip together every February since college, 8 years running. This year it was my turn to find the spot, and I'd never seen coordinates get that kind of love from people who clearly knew what they were doing. Danny's buddy Jake dropped us at the trailhead around noon, 3-mile hike in. He'd be back Tuesday at 8, 3 nights, 4 days. "If you get eaten by bears, I'm keeping your gear," Jake said. "No signal out there," Danny reminded him. "So if we're not at the trailhead Tuesday morning, I'll wait an hour, call search and rescue, then keep your gear." We laughed, shouldered our packs, and started walking. The hike was easy, a well-marked trail for the first 2 miles, then a fainter path that matched the directions exactly. We crossed the creek twice, skirted a ridge, and dropped into a valley that opened into the clearing like a curtain being pulled back. It was everything the photos promised, better. The creek threw the afternoon light around like diamonds. The fire pit was right where the picture showed it. Flat ground, good cover, the mountains holding the whole thing in their hands. But there was one thing the photos didn't show: the tree. It stood at the far edge of the clearing, a massive oak, ancient and gnarled, easily the biggest tree I'd ever seen outside a national park. Its trunk was wider than a car. Its branches reached out over the clearing like arms, the kind of tree that makes you feel small, the kind of tree that was old when your grandparents were born. "How did the post not mention this thing?" Zeph said. He was right. A dozen photos, paragraphs of description, and the most striking thing in the entire clearing, the poster hadn't said a word about it. I pulled up the post on my phone. I'd saved it offline since there was no signal. Scrolled the photos. Same creek, same rocks, same fire pit, same fallen log by the water. No tree. Not out of frame, not shot around. The photos were taken from angles where the tree should have been impossible to miss. In one, the photographer stood almost exactly where the oak was now, and behind him, in the picture, there was nothing but open sky. "Photoshop," Zeph offered. Why would anyone Photoshop out a tree? Nobody had an answer. Zeph was the one who found the carvings. We were setting up tents when he wandered to the oak, running a hand along the bark. "Hey, come look at this." Names, carved into the wood everywhere, starting at about waist height and going up, way up, higher than anyone could reach without a ladder. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Some small and careful, others gouged deep and fast, like whoever held the knife had been in a hurry. "It's like a guest book," Danny said. "People have been coming here a long time." Zeph traced one of the older ones near the top of his reach. "Look how high they go." I scanned the names: Jimmy, Terry, Charlie, Robert, Dale, Susan. Ordinary names, ordinary people, leaving their mark on an old tree the way hikers have since the beginning of time. Honestly, it was reassuring. Proof that other people had found this place, loved it, and left. Nothing about it felt wrong. Not yet. I woke at 2 in the morning and didn't know why. The fire had burned to embers. The creek was a low murmur. Night sounds, normal sounds. Then I heard the voices. At first I thought Danny or Zeph had gotten up, low, casual talk like two guys sitting around a fire. I almost rolled over. But then a third voice, and a laugh. 3 voices, and none of them sounded like my friends. I lay perfectly still. This was all Charlie's idea, you know. Hey, the coordinates checked out. Blame the internet. Terry thought it was a good idea, too. Easy, comfortable laughter. Old friends giving each other hell. Danny, I breathed. Barely a sound. Yeah, his voice came back tight from the next tent. I hear it. Zeph? What is that? Jimmy, come on, what'd you bring? Jimmy? Jim? Silence. Not a fade, not a trailing off. The voices just stopped, like someone pulled a plug. 1 second, 3 men talking around a fire. The next, nothing but the creek and the wind and my own heart slamming in my ears. I lay awake a long time. Eventually exhaustion won. In the morning, we stood around the dead fire and tried to make it make sense. Mass hallucination, Danny offered. All 3 of us heard the same names. And someone's messing with us. Bluetooth speaker in the woods. Zeph shook his head. No signal, no power. And who hikes 3 miles out here to prank random campers? He was already walking to the tree. He stopped, scanning the bark. Jimmy, he said. Terry. Charlie. He pointed. 3 names, grouped together, carved in the same hand. The same 3 names we'd heard in the dark. We should have left. I know that now. But here's the thing about fear in daylight. It shrinks. The sun was up, the creek was sparkling, and what had felt like absolute terror at 2 a.m. now felt like a story we'd tell at a bar. And there were rational explanations. Sound carries in a valley. Maybe there'd been other campers upstream once and the wind brought their voices down. Maybe they'd camped this very spot, found their own names on the tree, talked about it around their own fire. So we stayed. And the day was incredible. We fished the creek and Zeph pulled out a rainbow trout that had no business being that big. We hiked the ridge to a view that ran for miles. We cooked over the fire and told stories and laughed, and it felt like every camping trip we'd ever taken, distilled to its best parts. By sunset, the voices felt like a dream. That's when Danny had the idea. We should carve our names. He cut his first, then handed me the knife, then Zeph. Danny, 211. Mark, 211. Zeph, 211. 3 fresh names at the bottom of a century of them. We stepped back to admire it, and Zeph said, "Wait." "What?" "The dates." I looked at what I'd just carved. February 11th. Then I looked up at all the other names, all the other dates. February 11th. Every single one. The knife was still in my hand. My name was in the wood. And the sun was going down. Night 2 came easy. Tired legs, a good fire, stars out. The weirdness felt like something that had happened to someone else. I was asleep before my head hit the pillow. At 17 past 2, the voices came back. Same voices, Charlie, Terry, Jimmy. But different now. I saw it, I'm telling you. Where? Down by the water. He was just standing there. Charlie, you saw it, didn't you? Tell him. A pause, then flat. I saw something move. Probably a deer. You're full of it. You do this every time. It might have worked when we were kids, but... Silence. The same abrupt nothing, the same plug pulled. But this time, the fear in those voices hung in the air like smoke. These weren't men laughing around a fire. These were men who'd seen something and couldn't agree on what. And then they were gone. We met at the fire. Nobody had to say a word. We'd all heard it. I looked at Danny. Danny looked at Zeph. Zeph looked at the tree. Night 1, they were happy, he said, quietly. Night 2, they were scared. What happens on night 3, Danny whispered. Nobody answered. We didn't hike out. 3 miles doesn't sound far until it's dark and the trail's uneven and there's no signal. One twisted ankle and you're stranded on the trail instead of in a clearing with a fire. Jake was coming at 8. We just had to make it 12 hours. We spent the day packing everything, keeping the fire fed, fishing, not because we were hungry, but to have something to do with our hands, something normal. It's just voices, Danny said, watching his line drift. 2 nights of voices. We heard some weird stuff, and we're leaving tomorrow. That's the end of it. You're right, I said. People have carved their names on that tree for 100 years. That means people have been leaving here for 100 years. Right, so we'll be fine. But he didn't look at the tree when he said it. None of us did. We built the fire bigger that last night. Fed it everything we could spare. Extra wood, cardboard, a broken camp chair. The flames went 8 feet up, shoving the dark back to the tree line. We sat in a tight circle, close enough to touch. The tree was behind us, and I could feel it there the way you feel someone watching you from across a room. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. Nothing. Maybe it's done, Danny said. Maybe, Zeph said. By 2:30, the fire was dying. We'd burned through everything. The light pulled back like a tide, shadows creeping in from the edges. 3:17. Guys, Zeph said. He was staring past the fire, past the dying light, toward the creek. Something was standing at the edge of the clearing. At first I thought it was a stump, a shadow, my eyes playing tricks in the low light. Then it moved, slightly, a tilt of the head. It was a woman. Old, ancient, maybe. Dressed in robes, heavy, dark fabric that hung to the ground, a hood pulled back just enough to show her face, pale skin, deep lines, eyes that caught the firelight and held it. "Hello?" Danny called, his voice cracked. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just stood where the light met the dark, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. Not anger, not hunger. Something older than both. Patience. "What do you want?" I asked. She tilted her head, that same slow, bird-like consideration. Then her eyes began to glow. Not a reflection, not the fire. A light from inside, cold and white and ancient, filling them until they were 2 stars burning in that weathered face. She raised one hand, slow, deliberate, palm toward us, and every light went out. The fire, the embers, the stars, the moon, everything. Dark so complete, I couldn't see my own hands, couldn't see Danny, couldn't see Zeph. I opened my mouth to scream. Jake pulled into the trailhead at 7:45 Tuesday morning, 15 minutes early because he'd always been the responsible one. He waited until 8, then 8:30, then 9. At 9:15, he started up the trail. He reached the clearing at 10. The tents were still up, packs inside, sleeping bags rolled out, cooler still half full. 3 camp chairs around a fire pit full of cold ash. Everything was there, except us. He found the fishing gear by the water, my phone in my tent, battery dead, Zeph's journal open to a page that said only, "The names are all the same date. No struggle, no tracks leading away, no blood, no torn fabric, nothing to say anything had gone wrong at all. Just an empty campsite in a beautiful clearing, and no tree." Jake stood in the middle of the clearing and turned a slow circle. Creek, ridge, fire pit, tents. No tree, no massive oak, no carvings, no 100 years of names, no dates, just grass and sky and silence. Search and rescue looked for 6 days. They found nothing. The case went cold before it ever went warm. 3 weeks later, a man scrolling a camping forum passed a familiar post. GPS coordinates, detailed directions, beautiful photos of a clearing with a creek and mountains. The post had a new comment, posted that morning, from a username that belonged to a man who'd been missing for 23 days. One line, "Trust me, worth the hike." There's a cave on the Red River up in Adams that people pay money to walk through now. They string colored lights along the wet rock, and a man tells you the story of the Bell Witch in a voice meant to raise the hair on your arms, and at the end everybody laughs. That's what you do at the end of a ghost story. You laugh, and you walk back out to your car, and you've had your money's worth of being scared. My people have farmed the next bottom over from the old Bell place for 190 years. We don't go to the cave. And we don't laugh, because we know what the thing in that story actually was. And it wasn't a witch. Everybody knows the bones of it. Back around 1817, John Bell, a prosperous man, good land along the river, plenty of folks working it for him, started being troubled. First it was a strange animal in the field, a thing with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit that he shot at and missed. Then it was a knocking on the walls of the house at night, a scratching like a big dog at the door, only inside the walls. Then it got worse. Bedclothes dragged off in the dark, the Bell children, especially the young girl Betsy, slapped and stuck with pins and pulled by the hair by something that wasn't there to grab. And then the thing started to talk. That's the part the caveman tells best, because it's the part that sounds like a show. The voice came up out of nothing, a woman's voice. And it would sing hymns in the dark, and it would quote the preacher's sermon back word for word from a church 2 counties off that nobody in the house had been to. He would carry on a conversation with anybody bold enough to talk to it. People came from all over the state to sit in that front room and ask it questions. Andrew Jackson himself was said to have come and left in the night and never spoke of it after. They asked it what it was. It gave a different answer to every man who asked. A witch, a spirit, the ghost of an Indian, the voice of a child died unbaptized. It handed out answers the way you'd put off a child asking a question you have no intention of really answering. But to the family, when the door was shut and the strangers were gone and it was only the Bells, it was plainer. It told them why it was there. That's the part that doesn't make the tour. My great-great-granddaddy was a young man in those years, and he was one of the few people from outside the family that the thing ever spoke to straight. He'd gone to sit up with John Bell one bad night, the way neighbors did, and in the small hours the voice spoke to him out of the cold corner of the room, calm as you please, and told him a thing it plainly wanted carried out of that house. He carried it. He told his son, and his son told his, and it came down to me, and I'll give it to you the way it came to me. John Bell had taken a piece of ground that was never his to take. There was a stretch of the river bottom, good black land, the best on the place, that the old people, the people who were here long before any bell, had always left alone. Not because it farmed poorly, because it was owed. There was a marker on it, the kind of marker you'd walk right past unless somebody had taught you to read it, and the arrangement on that ground was old, and it was simple. You could live alongside it, but you could not take from it. John Bell took from it. He ran his fence out across it and put it to corn, and when a neighbor woman warned him off it, a woman the county afterward decided to call a witch, which is a thing men call a woman when they don't want to think too hard about what she said, he saw to it she was cheated out of her own place and left with nothing, and the ground called in what it was owed. The thing in that house was not a ghost, and it was not a curse some old woman laid. It was collection. It came for John Bell, and it came for Betsy, because Betsy was promised, the way the firstborn against a debt sometimes is, and it left the rest of the household mostly be. 4 years the county stood around it calling it a haunting, because a haunting is a thing that happens to you, and a debt is a thing you owe, and Lord, it is so much easier to be the victim of a thing than to be the one in the wrong. It told them how it would end, said it out loud, in front of witnesses, more than once. It said it would have John Bell, and it said it would not be hurried. In December of 1820, John Bell was found senseless in his bed. There was a little vial of dark liquid in the cupboard that nobody in the house could account for, and the voice laughed and said it had given him a dose from that vial that would do the work, and it sang while he died. Sang drinking songs, loud and ugly, through the whole of his dying and clear through the burying, sang over the men carrying the coffin. And when John Bell was in the ground, the torment stopped, all at once, like a debt marked paid. It told Betsy goodbye, kindly enough. It had never really had a quarrel with the girl once the account was settled, and it told the family it would come back in 7 years. And it did. 1828, the knocking came again in the walls at night, but the family that was left had learned the one thing worth learning. You don't answer it. They lay still. They didn't speak to it, didn't ask it anything, gave it nothing to settle against, and after a couple of weeks it gave up and went quiet. But before it went, it made one more promise. Not 7 years this time, a longer time. The old telling says 107 years, though my granddaddy always allowed the number went a little soft each time it got passed down, and the plain truth is nobody ever wrote it somewhere it couldn't be smudged. 107 years on from 1828 is 1935. My granddaddy was a boy that year, and he said his daddy kept the whole household to the old rules straight through it. You don't walk the bell bottom after dark. You don't answer a knock you can't account for. And if the river smells like turned earth in a dry spell, you stay in and you stay quiet. And 1935 came and it went, and nothing happened that anybody could lay a finger on, and the family let out its breath and decided the thing was finally done. Started, a little at a time, to laugh at the cave like everybody else. I never could. Because here's the thing I know that the tour doesn't. That last promise, the 107 years, that was never the thing saying when it would come back to the bells. The bells had paid. Their account was square the day they buried John. The thing said it would come back to the ground to collect from whoever was standing on it. And the ground is still there. The marker is still there, out in that good black bottom, for anybody who knows how to read it. And the family that owns the old Bell place now isn't Bell, and isn't any kin to me, and doesn't know the first true thing about what they're standing on. They run cattle on the river bottom, all of it, right across the part you are meant to leave be. I have watched them do it for years, and told myself it was none of my business, and the ground stayed quiet, and I let it lie. It is not quiet now. 3 weeks back, the man who owns it came to my door, first time in his life, looking a little sheepish, and asked me, did I ever hear any knocking out our way at night? Said his wife keeps waking to it, on the walls. Said his little girl's taken to talking to somebody in her room he can't see and won't say who, except that she calls her by a name. A woman's name, old-fashioned, nobody in their family. I didn't tell him anything. God forgive me, I just said it was likely the old house settling, and I shut my door on him. What was I going to say? That the clock his great-grandfather never even knew was wound, just finished running out. That the thing always tells you exactly what it is and exactly what it has come for, plain as morning, and the only mistake anybody has ever made with it is deciding to call it a witch. His last name is the one on the deed now, not mine. The debt followed the ground, not the blood. It always did. But I have farmed alongside that bottom my whole life. I have smelled that turned earth smell coming off the river this past dry week, the same as my granddaddy warned me. And I keep thinking on how the thing went after John Bell, sure, but how it slapped and stuck and pulled the hair of his daughter too, the young one, the promised one. And that man down the road has a little girl who's started calling a dead woman by name. I was 13 the summer I learned what silence really sounds like. We'd moved into one of those developments that swallowed up farmland in the 80s, winding streets named after trees that didn't grow there anymore. Oak Ridge, Maple Court, you know the type. But ours was built around 4 lakes, and that made it different. The big one was man-made, carved out by developers who understood what the word lakefront does to a price tag. That's where everyone went. Pontoon boats, inflatable rafts, teenagers shrieking off the public dock, sand they trucked in fresh every spring. A suburban paradise with a clubhouse and a beach that didn't exist in October. The other 3 were natural. They'd been there long before the bulldozers, tucked back in the woods and half forgotten, strung together by trails so overgrown most of my neighbors never knew they existed. The smallest was Lake Carl. The developer had named each lake after one of his children. I never met Carl, never learned a thing about him, whether he was the oldest or the youngest, whether he ever once stood on the shore that carried his name, whether he was even still alive. Just a name on a water nobody wanted, which was exactly why I loved it. You had to know the right trail, and even then you came out of it pushing through branches, stepping over roots that reached for your ankles. The shore was mud in spring and mosquitoes in summer. The other kids called it boring. They were welcome to, because Lake Carl had no pressure, no weekend fishermen with their fish finders, no tournaments, no limits anyone enforced. The bass in there were fat and slow and stupid, generations of fish that had never seen a lure they needed to fear. At the start of summer, I'd talk my dad into helping me drag a little aluminum rowboat down through the trees. 12 feet of dented silver that weighed almost nothing and leaked just enough to keep a bail bucket honest. We flipped it into the reeds and left it, and most mornings I'd ride down before the rest of the world woke up. Those mornings were mine. Just me, the mist, and fish that practically climbed into the boat. That morning started like all the others. I remember the ritual of it, waking in the dark, the house holding its breath around me, a t-shirt that already smelled like lake water, the empty streets, the click of the bike chain, the whisper of tires on cool asphalt, the trail damp, spiderweb strung with first light, dew soaking through my sneakers. I found the boat where I'd left it, flipped it, always checking for snakes first, a lesson I'd learned the hard way, and dragged it to the edge. The lake was glass, perfect unbroken glass, with mist sitting just above it like the water was breathing out. I pushed off. The creak of the oarlocks, the soft break of the paddle, the mist parting at the bow and closing behind me like the lake was swallowing me whole. By mid-morning, I'd caught and let go half a dozen, kept 2 for dinner. 13 years old and king of my own small country. Around 10, I anchored near the middle, maybe 40 yards off a little peninsula that reached out from the western shore. Good structure there. Sunk rocks, low branches, a raft of lily pads at the point. I'd pulled nice fish from that spot before. I cast. Watched the lure arc out, drop with a soft plip, and sink. And the summer wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't know to be grateful for. Birds calling across the water, insects droning in the reeds, rising and falling like something asleep. A frog, a fish rolling behind me, ripples opening in perfect circles. Real peace, the kind you don't recognize until you're older and it's gone. I'd made maybe a dozen casts when the world changed. The birds stopped. Not the way they hush when a hawk slides over, not gradual. Instant. Like a hand had come down on the whole forest and pressed it flat. The insects, gone. The frogs, gone. Even the water seemed to hold still, the last ripples from my cast smoothing away to nothing. And the air changed. Heavier. Like the pressure had dropped ahead of a storm that wasn't coming. I sat with my rod half raised, suddenly aware of my own breathing, my own heartbeat. People say silence can be deafening. I always thought that was just something writers wrote. But that morning, the absence of sound pressed on my eardrums with a real weight. It was loud. It was wrong in a way I had no word for. I've only heard that silence once in my life. It was that morning. I don't know how long I sat there. Seconds, probably. Long enough to start talking myself out of it. Some weather thing, some trick of the lake. When I heard it, thump. One heavy impact. Deep and wet, like a boulder dropped into thick mud. From the peninsula, from back in the trees. I went still. My hands closed on the rod until the knuckles went white. You're hearing things, I told myself. A branch, a deer, something that makes sense. I stared into the tree line, into the dark between the trunks. 40 yards, close enough to see, too far to know. Nothing moved. 10 seconds. 20. My pulse was the only sound left in the world. And then, thump, 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 thump. 5 steps, heavy, evenly spaced, walking with purpose. Something was coming through the trees, and it was big. Through the gaps in the leaves, I caught movement, a shape darker than the shadows it stood in. No outline I could name, no silhouette that matched anything I knew, just mass, just motion. Tall and broad in a way that didn't sit right. Then the smell reached me. I can only tell you it was wrong. Rot and musk, thick. Roadkill left days in the sun, and under it something alive. Wet fur, old meat. It didn't drift to me on the breeze. It hit me all at once, so heavy I could taste it. My eyes watered, my stomach turned. I should have gagged, recoiled, done something, but I couldn't move. My whole body had locked. A rabbit that's seen the fox. 3 more steps. Thump, thump, thump. Closer. Branches shifting now, shouldered aside by something passing through, something tall, taller than a man has any business being, 7 feet, 8. I was 13 and terrified, and it was hidden in the trees. I couldn't give you a number, but I could feel its weight through the water. Each step sent the faintest tremor across the lake, tiny rings that reached my boat and rocked it, just barely. And then it made a sound. Not a growl, not a roar. A grunt, low, short, dismissive. Like it had seen me, like it had looked out through the trees at this stupid kid frozen in a rowboat and decided something. 4 quick steps. My heart stopped, every muscle braced for the thing I couldn't outrun, couldn't fight, couldn't escape. A tin boat in the middle of a lake, ringed by woods where no one would have heard me scream. But the steps grew softer, not closer, softer. It was moving away. I don't know why. Maybe it had somewhere to be. Maybe it had already eaten. And here's the thought that still finds me on quiet nights. Maybe it looked at me across 40 yards of open water and decided I wasn't worth the walk. The smell thinned, carried off on a breeze I hadn't felt arrive. And then, like a switch thrown, the birds came back. The insects took up their drone. A frog spoke in the reeds. The world clicked back on as if it had never been off, as if nothing had happened. I sat a long time. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I finally trusted my body, I lifted the anchor with both fists, and I didn't row. I paddled, slow, silent, away from that peninsula, toward the far shore, as far from those trees as the water would take me. I never made a sound. I dragged the boat up the bank, and I walked home. Didn't ride. Walked, bike ticking along beside me, looking back every few steps. I didn't tell anyone. What would I have said? I was 13, alone, with no proof but a bad smell and some footsteps in the woods. My mom asked what was wrong when I came through the door. I told her I didn't feel good, and I spent the rest of the day in my room, flinching at every sound the house made. I went back to Lake Carl a few more times that summer, but only when my dad came along. He thought I'd finally gotten social. I never told him why. It was a full year before I had the nerve to go alone, and even then I never stayed past mid-morning. Never let myself get comfortable. Never stopped listening for that silence. Eventually we moved. My dad's work, another state. We packed up and left, the way people do. I grew up, got married, lived in a dozen houses in a dozen towns. But sometimes when it gets quiet, really quiet, I'm back on that water, the silence, the smell, that grunt and what it might have meant. I tell myself it was a bear. On the good days, that's what I believe. Black bears get big in that part of the country, or a man living rough who didn't want to be found. Or maybe a scared kid alone in a boat invented half of it, and the years filled in the rest. But I know what I heard. I know what I smelled. And I know that something stood in those trees and looked at me across 40 yards of open water, and then chose to walk away. Some questions don't get answers. I still think about Lake Carl more than I'd like to admit. Everybody's heard some version of what came down on the hill behind Flatwoods in September of 1952. It got in the papers as far as New York. They called it the Braxton County Monster, and then somebody decided Flatwoods Monster sounded better under a headline, and that's the name that stuck. 10 feet tall, a face that glowed red, a great pointed hood like a spade stood on end, came down in a ball of fire, hissed at a bunch of kids, made them sick, and was gone by morning. I was one of those kids. I'm the last of them now. And I have spent 70 years letting people believe the wrong story. Because the wrong story is the one that lets you sleep at night. I want to set the right one down before I go, even if nobody believes it, because I think the reason it's been quiet up on that hill is about to stop being true. It was a clear evening, early September, still warm. There was a bunch of us out by the schoolyard, me, the 2 Tanner boys, a couple others, and Mrs. Pruitt, who'd walked up to fetch her boy Roy for supper and stayed to talk with the other women. I'd have been 14. We saw it come down. Everybody in that part of the county saw it. A light crossed the sky from the east, slow for a falling star, too slow. And it didn't burn out the way they do. It came down whole, red-orange, and it went behind the rise of Holcomb's Hill north of town, and the glow stayed. That's the thing nobody tells right. A meteor hits and it's over. This came down and then it sat up there glowing, a dull red coming up over the tree line, pulsing, slow, like something breathing. You have to understand, we were boys. A thing falls out of the sky onto a hill you can walk to. You go look. Mrs. Pruitt came along too, I think mostly to keep us from killing ourselves. And she had a flashlight, and we went up the cow path through Holcomb's lower pasture toward that glow. I remember old man Holcomb wasn't with us. I remember thinking that was strange because it was his hill and his light, and his house sat right there with the lamps lit, and he never came out. I found out years later he'd been sitting in his kitchen with the door barred. He was the one man in the county who didn't go to look. He was old enough to have been told what the top of that hill was. Halfway up, the air changed. There was a smell. I've spent 70 years trying to name it, and the closest I get is a struck match and a penny held under your thumb. Sulfur and copper. It got stronger as we climbed, and the grass up there was wet, but it hadn't rained, and the wet was a low fog that lay along the ground no higher than your knees, moving against the slope. Up the hill. Fog lays in the low places. This was climbing. The dog one of the Tanners had brought wouldn't go past the fence line. It stood and shook, and then it turned and ran for home. And I have thought many times since that the dog was the only one of us with any sense. We came up over the last of the rise, and there was the thing that fell. It wasn't a rock. It was down in a kind of seam in the hilltop, a low place between 2 big old standing stones. And I'll come back to those stones. And it was glowing that red, and it was the size of a hay wagon, and it was wrong in a way I can't make a shape for. It pulsed, and the pulsing went with the smell somehow. The brighter it got, the more your eyes ran and your throat closed. And then the other thing stood up. It came up on the far side of the seam, between us and the fallen thing, and it rose and rose, taller than a man, taller than 2, until its head, that pointed hood everybody draws, was up among the low branches. The face inside the hood was a dull red light, not eyes exactly, just a glow where a face would be. It made a sound, low, not a roar, more like steam let off slow. Mrs. Pruitt screamed and the boys scattered, and I'll tell you the truth, I froze. I was the closest, maybe 20 feet from it, looking up, and it looked down at me. And here is the thing I have never told a living soul. The thing it took me 50 years to even let myself think. It didn't come for me. It could have. I was a froze boy at arm's reach. Everybody who tells the story says it lunged, it chased, it floated down at us, and there was a rush and a mist, and we ran. But it did not come from me. It turned. It turned away from us, toward the thing in the seam, the fallen thing, and it spread out. Not arms, I haven't got a word. It spread, and it came down over that red glow like a man throwing a wet tarp over a fire he means to smother. The mist rolled off it when it did that. Rolled down the hill over all of us in a wave, and that's when the sickness hit. The throats, the eyes, the heaving, and we ran, and Mrs. Pruitt dragged Roy by the collar, and not one of us looked back. Behind us, the red glow went out. Not the creature's face. The fallen thing. The thing in the seam stopped glowing, like it had been put out, like it had been put back. By the next day, the men had settled on the story the world decided to keep. Frightened kids, a meteor, swamp gas glowing on a hilltop, a barn owl in a tree that a scared boy worked up into a monster 10 foot tall. The Air Force sent a man around. There was a smell on the grass for a week, and a couple of us had burns in our throats the doctor couldn't account for, and they wrote that down as fear, hysteria, children winding each other up. And maybe I'd have come to believe it myself. God knows I wanted to. Except for old man Holcomb. He found me alone weeks after, and he asked me one thing. He asked me, "Did it come at you, son, or did it go to the light?" And I told him, it went to the light. It put the light out. And he shut his eyes like a man hearing his fevers broke, and he said, "Then it's still up there. Thank God, it's still up there." And then he told me what his granddaddy had told him, which is what I'm telling you. The thing we saw wasn't a monster, and it wasn't from the sky. It was already there. It had always been there. Those 2 big stones in the seam on the hilltop were set by people gone so long before us that the folks who were here before my people already thought them old, and the stones were a lid. Under that hilltop there is something the old ones put down and waited and meant to keep down, and the tall thing with the red face is its keeper, its jailer. It does not leave that hill. It has one job, and it has done that job longer than there's been a Braxton County, and it does it without ever once being seen. Because nobody goes up that hill. Because the families have known for 200 years that you do not go up that hill. What came down out of the sky in 52 wasn't a meteor, and it wasn't a ship. It was a piece of what's under the hill. Getting out. I don't know how. I don't know if a thing that's buried claws its own way up or calls something down to itself or what. Holcomb didn't know either. All he knew, all his people knew, was the sign. When a light comes down on that hill and sits and glows and breathes, it means the lid's been worked loose and the keeper has to come up and set it back. And it did. We watched it do it. We were just the fools who walked up into the middle of a thing being shut, and the mist that made us sick was nothing but what comes off the shutting. We were never the point. We were never in any danger from the keeper at all. The only danger on that hill is the thing the keeper keeps down. I kept the secret. I kept the rule. I'm an old man in Flatwoods, and I've watched that hill out my north window my whole life. And for 70 years it has been quiet and dark, and that quiet has been the sweetest thing I own. Holcomb's place fell in years ago. There's nobody on that hill now. Nobody's been told. My own grandchildren think the Flatwoods Monster is a thing you buy a t-shirt of at the gas station off the interstate. They put it on a road sign. There's a festival. And here is why I'm setting this down tonight. 3 weeks ago, the Reese girl lives out the Sutton Road, told her mother she'd seen a tall man standing at the tree line on Holcomb's Hill at dusk. A man too tall, with a face that was lit. Her mother laughed it off. Last week, a hunter's dog wouldn't cross the old fence line and ran home shaking. And tonight there is a low fog on my north field lying wrong, climbing instead of settling, and the air coming in at my window smells like a struck match and a penny under the tongue. I have smelled that smell once before in my life. 70 years ago, on a hilltop, the night the lid came loose. The keeper put it back that night. The keeper was still up there, doing its job. But Holcomb's gone and his granddaddy's gone, and I am the last man alive who ever went up that hill and came down knowing what it was. There's nobody left to watch for the sign, and the sign is here. And I am too old to climb that hill and see whether the tall thing with the red face is still standing over that seam. I'm afraid that this time the light came down and nothing came up to meet it. My grandmother used to say that some debts can't be paid in money. She'd say it the way she did everything, crossing herself or throwing a pinch of salt over her shoulder without looking, the way you'd wave off a fly. I thought it was just old woman talk, the kind of thing you nod at and let go. I don't let it go anymore. I can't. There was nothing strange about how it started. No cursed object, no midnight ritual. Just paperwork and greed, which in my experience are the same thing wearing different coats. I was a developer. I bought land cheap, scraped it clean, and sold it dear. It paid for a house on the good side of town, a private school for my daughter, my wife's good jewelry. I used to think that was the whole of the world, what a man could buy, and what he couldn't buy yet. Mercer Place came across my desk in October. 20 acres at the back end of the county, up a hollow the maps barely bothered with. The family had been there 60 years, 3 generations, in a scatter of trailers and tin-roofed lean-tos that had grown up the hillside like fungus. No deed, no title, just a handshake their grandfather made with a farmer named Eli Combs, who'd been dead 40 years and left no heirs. In the eyes of the law, the Mercers owned nothing. I gave him 30 days. The law made me give that much, and I didn't give a day more than I had to. The old woman came to my office on the 29th. Verna Mercer was small and weathered, hill country old, in a man's wool coat 2 sizes too big. Her hands looked like roots that had been pulled out of the ground and left to dry, but it was her eyes that I remember, dark as the water at the bottom of a well, and they did not blink. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "I come to ask for more time. The deadline's tomorrow, Mrs. Mercer. My people have been up that hollow longer than you've been alive. My mother is buried there, my husband, some that I can't even put names to anymore." She set her hands on the back of the chair but did not sit. "I'm asking you, please." I'd heard it all before, every plea, every sad story. You learn to let it run past you in this business, like water off a tin roof. "I'm sorry," I said, and I wasn't. "The law is the law. You've got until midnight tomorrow." She looked at me a long moment. Then she said, "You have a girl?" It wasn't a question. Something cold turned over in my chest. "How do you know that?" "I know things, Mr. Harrison. I know you don't need that land. I know you've got more money than 3 men could spend in 3 lives. I know you could give us till spring, and it wouldn't cost you a thing but patience." She tipped her head. "But patience is the one thing your kind never has. That's not how business works. No, she agreed. It's how cruelty works. And she said it so plain, so without heat, that it landed harder than any curse could have. She reached into that big coat and took out a photograph, old and soft at the corners, and set it on my desk. A little girl, maybe 8, dark hair, gap-toothed, grinning at whoever held the camera. My granddaughter, Verna said, Della. That hollow is the only home she's ever known. I pushed the photo back across the desk. I've got a business to run. She picked it up with those rude hands, kissed it once, tucked it away. Then she said the thing I have not been able to get out of my head since. A debt that can't be paid in coin gets paid in kind, Mr. Harrison. You take our home, you take our dead, you take everything we've got, and you'll pay it, not in money, in kind. Is that a threat? It's just the truth, she said. And she walked out, and I never saw her again. Not the living her. They were gone by the deadline. I didn't watch them go. I had contractors to call. Inside a week, the trailers were hauled off and the hill was scraped down to red dirt. They found the graves during the grading. 7 of them, unmarked, set in a ring under a big old oak at the top of the hollow. The foreman called me, not sure what to do. I told him to move them. There's a potter's field on the far side of the county. The state would cover it. Sir, he said, some of these look real old. Shouldn't we do this slow, maybe get somebody out here? We're already behind, I said, and I hung up and I went back to my spreadsheets. They scattered 7 graves into one county hole that afternoon and cut down the oak and pulled the stump, and I never thought about it again. That night I dreamed I was digging, my hands down in cold black dirt, nails splitting, looking for something I couldn't name. I woke up with dirt packed under my fingernails, deep and dense, like I'd been at it for hours, and there was a mark on my neck just under my left ear, small, red, warm to the touch. It spread. Over that next week, it grew from a blemish into a web of dark lines branching up under my jaw and down toward my collarbone, like roots feeling for water. Not red anymore, black, and just under the skin, and when I lay still at night I could feel them moving, a slow, wet, crawling feeling, like something taking hold. My wife begged me to see a doctor. I saw 3. The tissue came back inconclusive. The blood showed nothing. 2 of them gave me long words that meant they had no idea. The third one, an old man, kind eyes, waited until the others had gone and shut the door. Mr. Harrison, he said, quiet, I've practiced 40 years. This isn't medical. I can't treat it. He looked at the map of black climbing my throat. Have you wronged somebody lately? Somebody who'd know the old ways? I thought of Verna Mercer. Those well-water eyes. I tried to find them after that. Hired a man, called in favors, ran every database I could reach. The Mercers were gone like they'd never been. No address, no paper, nothing. The roots kept on, down my chest, across my shoulders, pulsing to a rhythm that was not my heart. I started waking in places I had no memory of walking to. The backyard, on my knees in the flower bed, fingers bloody. The basement, staring at the concrete like I could see down through it. Once in my car, parked at the foot of that cleared hollow at 3 a.m, the engine cold, the oak long gone, and still, if I let my eyes go soft, I could see it standing there. And under it, 7 dark shapes watching me, waiting. My wife took our daughter and left on a Tuesday. By then, the marks had reached my face, and our girl wouldn't look at me. 6 years old, hiding behind her mother from her own father. I don't blame either of them. I watched the car go and felt something crack, way down, something a lot deeper than my heart. That night, Verna came to me. Not a dream, I want to be clear. I felt the mattress sink with her weight. "You understand now," she said. "The debt. Please," I could barely make the word. "I'll give the land back. I'll give whatever you want. Just make it stop." The land's gone. The graves are scattered. The oak is ash. There's nothing left to give back. She sat there, patient as stone. And anyhow, that's not why I came. Then why? She took out the photograph again. The little girl, the gap-toothed grin. "Della died 3 days after we left that hollow," she said. "There wasn't any shelter. There wasn't any warmth. The cold took her. She was 8 years old. Her voice never broke. That was the worst of it. She'd done her breaking long ago. What was left was just the fact of it, plain as a stone. I didn't know. You didn't care to know. That's the same thing." She laid the photo on my chest, over my heart. "Here's your choosing, Mr. Harrison. The debt can take you, slow and ugly, until there's nothing left of you but the husk. That's justice. That's what you earned. Or you can take it up yourself, willing, not as a punishment, as a penance. You carry it, you feel it, you let it teach you, and when you've truly learned, it'll pass." "Learned what?" "What it is," she said, "to lose every single thing you love because somebody decided you didn't matter. I chose to carry it. The curse didn't stop. But it changed. The black under my skin stopped feeling like rot and started feeling like roots, and they reached out past me. When I passed a man sleeping in a doorway, I felt his cold in my own bones. When I saw a family put out on a curb with their lives in trash bags, I felt the floor go out from under them like it was my own floor. I sold the company. I liquidated all of it. I put the money into the only things that ever quieted the roots: shelters, lawyers for families about to lose their homes, land bought and deeded back to people who'd had theirs taken. It is not enough. It will never be enough. Della is still dead. The Mercers are still scattered to wherever the poor go. The graves are still lost. But every morning the roots dig a little deeper, and every morning I feel a little more, and I get up and I try to give back what I can. It's been 3 years. My wife remarried. A good man, no black under his skin. My daughter's 9 now, gap-toothed and bright, and she mails me her drawings sometimes. I pin them on the wall and look at them for longer than is probably healthy. Last week I found an old woman asleep on a bench outside one of my shelters. Small, weathered, hands like roots, and when she opened her eyes they were dark as well water. "Verna," I said. She studied me a while, and the roots under my skin pulsed, answering her like they knew her. Then she smiled. First time I ever saw her smile. It was a sad thing, and an old thing, and full of more than I could read. "You're learning," she said. "Finally. Will it ever be paid? On you giving back what you really took?" She stood gathering that big coat around her. "Not the land, not the money. What you really took was their belief that the world isn't cruel. You give that back, one soul at a time, and when you've given enough..." She didn't finish. She just walked off around the corner, and I didn't follow, because I knew there'd be nothing there. Up at the back of the county, where the Mercer Hollow used to be, I planted an oak last spring. It's just a switch of a thing right now. Under it I set 7 stones, one for every grave I scattered, and one more, set a little apart from the rest, for a gap-toothed girl named Della, who deserved a great deal more than the cold. The roots inside me go quiet when I stand there. The 7 stones are always clean, no matter how long I stay away. I think that's her telling me she knows. My grandmother said some debts can't be paid in money. She was right. Some debts can only be paid by becoming a different man than the one who ran them up. I'm still paying. I expect I'll pay till there's nothing left of me at all. And I've come to think that's exactly as it should be. My granddaddy had one rule about the mountain. He only said it to me the once because once was all it took. Don't let a light find you. We lived at the foot of Brown Mountain in Burke County, where the Catawba River comes down out of Linville Gorge and the land goes flat into pasture for a mile before it climbs again. From our porch you could see the whole long back of that ridge black against a sky that was only a little less black, and most nights that's all it was. A ridge. Trees. The kind of nothing your eyes quit seeing after you've lived with it long enough. But some nights they were lights. They'd come up off the ridge line slow, the color of a lantern flame seen through a dirty window. Not white, not quite yellow. Something older than either. One at a time mostly, a light would lift and hold and drift along the dark like it was walking a fence line. Then it would go out, and a while later, off to the side, another would come up and do the same. People have argued about those lights longer than my family's been in that valley, and we've been there since before the war. The government sent men, 1913 and again after, geologists with their instruments, and they wrote it down as train headlights coming up off the Catawba Flat. Then the great flood of '16 washed out every bridge and rail in the county, no trains for weeks, and the lights came up the same as they always had. So the men came back and wrote it down as swamp gas, then foxfire, then the moon caught in river mist. Every few years somebody finds a new reason, and the reason is always the kind of thing you can fit in a pamphlet, and the lights go on not caring what's in the pamphlet. My granddaddy never argued with any of it. He'd just listen to a man explain about headlights and nod, polite, and when the man was gone he'd say, "That's right, son, ain't nothing up there." Say it with a look that meant the opposite, because the families knew. Not the tourists who parked at Wiseman's View with their thermoses. The families, the Hollises, the Wisemans, the Tates, us. The ones whose people were buried in ground the mountain could see. We knew the lights weren't drifting. They were looking. I had a brother, Daniel, older than me by 9 years, which at the time felt like he was halfway to grown and I was still underfoot. Daniel didn't hold with the old rule. He'd been off to Morganton for school and come back with the idea that everything his daddy believed was just hill superstition dressed up to scare children, and he wasn't shy about saying so. The fall I was 12, that'd be 63. A couple of his friends dared him to walk the ridge after dark and prove there was nothing to it. Daniel took the good brass lantern off the porch hook and he laughed and he told Mama he'd be back by 10 and he went up the cattle trail toward the ridge with the lantern swinging. I watched from the porch. I could see his lantern the whole way, this one little moving spark going up the black slope, and I'll tell you what I remember. what I've never once been able to set down right in all the years since. A light came up to meet it. It rose off the ridge, slow, the way they do, that old lantern flame color, and it held a piece, and then it started toward Daniel's lantern, not fast, steady. And the thing I remember is that the two of them looked exactly the same from where I stood. You could not tell which was my brother and which was the mountain. Two little flames on the dark, drifting toward each other along that ridge. They got close. And then there was only one. I hollered for my granddaddy. He came out on the porch in his union suit and looked up that mountain a long time, and his face, I'd never seen his face do what it did. He didn't run up after Daniel. That's the part nobody understands when I tell it. He didn't go. He just watched. And after a while he said, quiet, more to himself than to me, well, it found him. Daniel came back down around midnight. He was fine. That's what he said, and that's how he looked. He had the lantern still lit. He said he'd walked the ridge and seen the lights up close, and they weren't anything, just a glow, cold, no heat in them. And one had come right up near him, and he'd held his lantern out to it, and it had been like looking at his own flame in a mirror, and then it had gone out. And he'd gotten bored and come home. He was almost smug about it. See, he said, nothing. And for a long while it looked like he was right. Years. He married a Tate girl, took work at the furniture mill in Drexel, raised 2 boys. He'd won the argument, far as anybody could tell. The old rule was just a rule for children. But I'll tell you the thing I noticed, being his brother. Being the one who watched him on the porch. Daniel never looked at the mountain again. Not once. We'd be out in the yard with that ridge right there filling up half the sky, and his eyes would go anywhere but up. At first I figured he was sore about being teased over the whole business. Then I figured he just didn't think on it. It was a long time before I understood it was the other thing. He couldn't look at it. The way you can't quite meet the eye of a man you owe money to, like it might catch his eye back. My granddaddy died in 71. Before he went, he finally told me what the families actually believe, the part they don't put in the pamphlets, the part you only get told when it comes your turn to keep it. The lights aren't ghosts. They aren't the lanterns of lost searchers, which is the pretty story the tourist books like. Their account. The mountain keeps a tally of who belongs to it. Everybody born in the shadow of that ridge, in the ground it can see. The mountain knows them, the way you'd know your own herd. And every so often a light comes up and goes looking, and it walks the dark slow until it finds one of its own. And when it finds you, it settles on you, light to light. It doesn't take you that night. That's the part that fooled the geologists and fooled my brother. Nothing happens that night. It just marks you, counts you, sets you on the side of the ledger that's coming. And then someday, a year, 10 years, 40, the mountain calls in what it's owed. Granddaddy said the families learned it the long way, over generations, by keeping their own tally against the mountains. They wrote down who went up and got found, and they wrote down when those folks died, and the deaths were not random. A man found by a light in his 20s might live to be old, but he'd go in a way that put him back on the mountain. Drowned in the Catawba, lost in the gorge, heart give out on the high pasture. The mountain doesn't hurry, it just doesn't forget, and it always collects on its own ground. That's why you don't go up. Not because a light will kill you where you stand, because it will find you. And once you're found, you spend the rest of your life being owed. Daniel died in the spring of 2003. He was 61, healthy as a horse, retired off the mill with a good pension. He went up into Linville Gorge with his 2 grown boys to fish the river, a thing he'd done 100 times. Except this once he wandered off up a side trail while they were rigging their lines, and they found him that evening at the bottom of a 40-foot drop with his neck broke. In good light, on dry ground, on a trail he had known his whole life. His boys couldn't make sense of it. There was nothing up there to make a man fall. The sheriff wrote it down the way the geologists write down the lights, the kind of answer you can put in a report. Misadventure. Lost his footing. I didn't say a word to his boys. What was there to say? That their daddy got found on a ridge in '63 when he was a smart-mouthed kid with a borrowed lantern, and the mountain waited 40 years to walk him off a trail he could have walked blind. You can't put that in a report. You can't even say it out loud at the funeral. But I knew. I'd watched it happen from the porch when I was 12. I'd seen two flames become one. I'm old now myself, older than Granddaddy was when he told me. I never set foot on that mountain a day in my life. I kept the rule. I raised my own children to keep it, and they think I'm a foolish old man, and they live up north now where there's no ridge to keep away from. And maybe that's the only way to ever really be safe, to live somewhere the mountain can't see you. I tell myself I did everything right. But here's the thing, and it's the reason I finally set this down, the reason I needed somebody to know. 3 nights ago I was on the porch after dark, the way I am, and there was a light on the ridge. Nothing strange in that. There's lights most clear nights. I've watched 10,000 of them. Except this one came up, and it held, and then it started down the slope, off the ridge, down toward the flat, toward the pasture. They don't do that. In all my years, I've never once seen a light leave the mountain. It's closer tonight. It was at the top fence line yesterday evening. Tonight it's at the bottom of the field. That old lantern color, cold, no bigger than a flame, holding just above the grass. I never went up. I swear before God I never let one find me up there. But I have sat on this porch at the foot of this mountain near every night of my life. In plain sight. On ground it can see. I think it just took its time. I think I've been counted all along. There's a children's story they tell up in the mountains, the kind they print in the little paperbacks they sell at the park visitor centers, about Spearfinger, Utlunta in the old Cherokee, the one with the pointed finger. An old woman made of stone, with a long stone forefinger sharp as an awl, who could wear any face she pleased, and who came down out of the high balds to take a child's liver and leave the child to sicken and waste away. And the story always ends the same comforting way. The people were clever. They dug a pit and tricked her into it, and a little bird lit on her hand and showed them her heart was hid there in her fist, and they killed her, and the mountains were safe again. My grandmother laughed at that ending one time. It is the only time in my life I ever saw her laugh with no happiness in it at all. She said, "Child, you do not kill a thing like that. You learn its manners." My grandmother was raised in a holler below Whiteside Mountain, raised half by her own people and half by the old Cherokee families that never left when the soldiers came to make them, the ones who hid up in the high coves and stayed. What she knew she got from them, sitting at their feet as a girl, and she never got it from any book. She told me the true shape of Spearfinger when I was old enough to keep a secret and not yet old enough to be too proud to believe her. Spearfinger is real, she said, and she was never killed. The pit and the bird is a story the people made up afterward so their own children could sleep. What's true underneath it is harder to hold. She doesn't take just anybody. That's the first thing the books get wrong. She is not a monster prowling for any child that wanders too far up the creek. She is particular. She comes only for the ones that are already going, the ones with the wasting sickness already set in them, the ones the holler's old women could look at across a churchyard and know, the way you can look at a tree in full green in August and know it is already dead and just hasn't been told yet. Spearfinger comes for the marked, never once for the well. And the second thing, the thing my grandmother dropped her voice to nearly nothing to tell, is the face. She wears the face of somebody you love. Always. Somebody gone on ahead of you, a grandmother 20 years in the ground, a baby brother that didn't see his second winter. She comes to the door wearing a kind, familiar face, and she is gentle, and she does not frighten the child even a little, and she puts out her hand, and the child takes it and goes with her glad. Because who wouldn't go with their own granny come back smiling and calling them by their pet name? That is the mercy of it, my grandmother said. And she said the word mercy like it cost her something to put in her mouth. Because the wasting sickness is a long, hard, frightened way for anybody to die, and worse for a little one. Months of it, the fever and the shrinking and the being afraid in the night. And Spearfinger makes it quick, and she makes it kind, and the child goes without any fear at all, holding a hand it loves. The stone finger, when it comes, my grandmother said, the child never even feels it, never knows. I asked her the boy's question. I said, well then, if the child was dying anyway, she's not so bad, is she? She's just easing them on ahead. My grandmother looked at me a long, long while. She said that is exactly what she wants you to think. That is exactly how she has been let to go on doing it for 1,000 years. Nobody ever drove her out of these mountains, child, because down deep, nobody ever quite wanted to. She only took the ones we were going to lose regardless, and she took the fear out of the losing. And so the old women called her a monster out loud in the daylight, and unlatched the door for her at night. That was the bargain these mountains made a long time before you or I, and no clever little bird ever broke it. Then she told me the part that has kept me up the most nights since. She said she saw it happen, the once, when she was a girl. A boy in the next holler over, name of Eli, took sick in the fall, the wasting kind, the kind the old women took one look at and went quiet over. And one cold evening near the end, his mother heard him talking and laughing in his room, bright as he'd been in a year, and she looked in, and Eli told her his granddaddy had come to see him. His granddaddy, who had been dead since before Eli was born. Standing at the foot of the bed, Eli said, in his good Sunday coat, telling him there was nothing to be afraid of. And the mother, and this is the part, the mother did not run in and snatch her boy up. She had been raised in that holler. She knew. She stood in the doorway and she made herself say, "That's right, baby. You go on with your granddaddy." And she stepped back and she shut the door and she sat down in the next room with her apron over her face. And in the morning the boy had passed in his sleep with no fear on him and a little smile. And there was a single mark on his side like the stick of an awl, and his mother thanked God for it. That is the manners of the thing, my grandmother said. You don't fight it, you thank it. And you pray your whole life it never gets the count wrong. Because, and here she took my face in both her hands so I'd hold still and hear it. The trouble with letting a thing be the one to decide who's already dying is that it decides. And a thing that has been the one deciding for 1,000 years, with nobody watching it close, with everybody glad to look the other way and thank it after, a thing like that can start to see the mark on a child that isn't sick at all. And who is left to argue? Who is going to stand in front of a thing that only ever takes the dying and tell it, no, You have that one wrong. That child is well. My grandmother has been gone 40 years now. I'm older than she was when she sat me down. And I will be honest with you. I let it go soft in my mind the way you do. It became just a thing my grandmother believed, the way the old ones believed a great many things, and the years smoothed it over, and I did not think on Spearfinger from one decade to the next, until this spring. My son and his family moved back into the old holler, wanted to raise a little one with land around her and creek water and dark at night, the way I was raised. My granddaughter, 5 years old, bright as a new dime, healthy as any child I've ever laid eyes on, climbs the apple tree higher than her daddy likes, has not been sick a day in her life that I can recall. A week ago, she started talking about her Nana. My wife, that child's great-grandmother, has been in the ground since before the girl was ever born. The child never met her. There is not a picture of her up in that house. My son was never sentimental that way. But my granddaughter has started saying that Nana comes to her window in the evenings and talks to her. A nice old woman, she says, with a soft voice. And how does she know it's her Nana? Nana told her so. And she smells, the child says, like the purple flower soap. My wife washed with lilac soap every day of her life. 40 years that woman has been gone. There is no earthly way that child could know it. My son thinks it is a little girl's pretend friend. He thinks it is the sweetest thing. He told me about it laughing, the way you'd pass along a darling thing your child said at supper. And I have sat up every night since on the porch of my own house down the road, looking up the dark holler toward their one lit window, trying with everything I have left to make myself believe my grandmother was wrong. Because the child is not sick. That is what I keep coming back around to every night, like a tongue to a sore tooth. She is not sick at all. But something kind and patient has learned my dead wife's face, and it has come to my granddaughter's window, and it has begun, gentle as anything in this world, to teach a healthy child not to be afraid of it. I was pit boss for Mr. Aldous Crane the better part of 9 years, up in the gold country in Lumpkin County, Georgia, back when those mountains were still full of men chasing color and most of them dying poor at it. I'm going to tell you how Crane's mine really closed. There's a marker up on Naylor Mountain that says Rockfall, 18 and 59, and that marker is a lie I helped to tell. Crane had a good mine. Not the creek pen the poor men did, a real hard rock cut into the side of Naylor that followed a seam of gold back into the dark 1/4 mile and better. 30 men on it in the good years, and like any mine pulling real color, his men stole from him. You couldn't help it, and you couldn't stop it. A man works a 10-hour shift with his bare hands in the very stuff that's worth more than his whole year's wage, and some of it goes in his boot, in his cheek, in the seam of his cap. Crane knew it. Every owner knew it. Most of them counted a little leakage as the cost of the thing, priced it in, and went on. Not Crane. Crane could not stand to lose a flake. I have known greedy men. You don't run a mine without meeting a few. But Crane was greedy the way some men are religious. It pained him in his body to think of his gold riding out in another man's boot. He had us strip the men down at the end of every shift, which only made them cleverer and made them hate him, and the gold walked out the adit just the same. And then one winter he went up Sleeping Creek to see the witch. I don't know what else to call her, an old woman, lived alone past where the wagon road gave out, and people went to her for the things you go to such a woman for. A sick child the doctor had quit on, a husband who'd strayed, a debt you couldn't collect any other way. She dealt plain. That's the thing I remember about her. No cackling, no show. She talked to you like a woman selling you a hog. Here's the price. Here's what you get for it. Mind you don't come back later saying you didn't understand. Crane took me up there with him. He told her what he wanted, a way to stop his men carrying off his gold. She sat by her little fire a while, and then she said she could lay a thing on the mountain itself that would see to it. Any gold carried out a nailer by a hand that didn't own it would have to come back. The men wouldn't even know they were doing it. They would just bring it back to him. Then Crane asked her the price. She said there would be a toll. Every month, on the dark of the moon, he was to set out a measure of gold, and she named it, and it was a fair measure, a small part of what the spell would save him, and she would carry it up into the mountain and give it over to what lived there, so the mountain stayed content and asked for nothing more. And once a year, at the turn, she would come down to see the toll was paid right. Crane did the sum in his head the way he did every sum. The thieves were costing him more than her toll ever would. He shook her dry old hand on it, and we went back down the mountain, and he was already counting his money. And it worked. Lord, it worked. The first dark of the moon, 3 of the men got up out of their bunks in the dead middle of the night, asleep on their feet, eyes open and seeing nothing, and they walked up to the mine and brought it all back. Every grain they had ever carried off, out of boots and tobacco tins and the chinking of their own cabin walls, and they laid it on the scale in Crane's own office, neat as you please, and walked back to their bunks and never remembered a step of it. And it didn't stop with the old stealings. From that night on, no flake left nailer in a hand that didn't own it. A man could carry Crane's gold to the mouth of the adit and no further. His own legs would turn him around and walk him back to the scale. The leakage Crane had bled over for years just stopped. Every ounce the mountain gave up went straight into Crane's strongbox and stayed there. The mine had never been so profitable. 2 good years. Crane put on weight. He bought a fine house down in Dahlonega and a finer buggy, and he took to standing at the mouth of the cut of an evening with his thumbs in his vest watching the ore come out, and I never in my life saw a man so satisfied with the world. And every dark of the moon he set out the measure on a flat stone at the trailhead up Sleeping Creek, and by morning it was gone. And once a year, the old woman came down out of the laurel, quiet as weather, and looked over his books and his scale and nodded and went back up. A small thing, the cost of a miracle. You would think a man so blessed would let well enough alone. But I have told you what kind of greedy Crane was. The kind that is a hunger and not a want. The kind that can't ever be filled because the filling was never the point. 2 years in, fat and rich and safe, Crane started to chew on the toll. He would stand and watch that measure of gold sitting on the stone in the moonlight before he could make himself walk away from it. And you could see it cost him more every single month to leave it lying there. It wasn't that he couldn't spare it. He could spare it 10 times over. It was that it was his, and it was going to her. And Aldous Crane could not abide a single grain of his gold ending up in another hand. That was the whole reason he'd climbed up that creek in the first place. He started saying it out loud to me, the way he worked everything out loud. The spell's already laid, he'd say. She put it on the mountain, not on herself. She told us so to our faces. So it'll keep right on working whether I pay the old woman or not. Why am I handing her a fortune a year for a thing that's already done and bought? I told him I didn't think it wise to reason that way about a thing he didn't rightly understand. He didn't want to hear it. A man like Crane never bought a thing he didn't believe he owned outright, and in his mind he had bought that spell, free and clear, and the toll was just a tax some old woman in the laurel had figured how to charge him. and Aldous Crane did not pay a tax he believed he could get out of. If I didn't have to pay her, he'd say over and over, like a man in love with a number, it'd all be mine, every ounce of it, all mine. She came down at the turn of the year, the way she always did, and Crane had 4 of us waiting on her. I was one of the 4. I will not dress it up for you. We were paid men, and he was the man who paid us. We took her up the mountain. She did not fight us, and she did not curse us, and that was the worst of all of it, the way she didn't. And we took her into the cut, deep, down to the wet gallery at the bottom. And on the way down, she stopped just the once, by the lantern, and looked at Crane a long moment, the same plain look she had given him across her own fire the night she named the price. She said, "The toll don't stop being owed just because you stop paying it, Mr. Crane." And then we did the thing we were brought up there to do. We left her where she fell, in the wet gallery at the bottom of the cut, in the dark, and we climbed back up into the daylight. Crane closed his books on her the same way he closed his books on everything. She'd come down out of the laurel and just never gone back up, and who in that country was going to come asking after a witch? He rode home that night the happiest I ever saw him. He had kept his spell and shed his toll. It was all his now, every ounce. The next dark of the moon, Crane did not set out a measure. There was no one left to carry it up the mountain, and nothing, he believed, left to carry it for. That was the month the gold dried up. I don't mean it slowed. I mean a face that had run rich and yellow the evening before was barren, gray rock the next morning, like it had never held color in its whole life. The seam we'd followed a quarter mile back into Naylor just closed, pinched off to nothing between one shift and the next, and no man who knows hard rock will ever tell you that's a thing the ground does on its own. We drove that drift another 40 feet on Crane's hollerin' and found water and gravel and not one speck of gold. And then we found good solid country rock where the vein had been, whole and unbroken, like the gold had never run through it at all. The men knew before Crane would let himself know it. Men who work underground can feel when a place has turned its back on them. They drew what pay there was and they drifted off down the mountain, and I don't blame a one of them. And then the mountain started in on what Crane had already carried out of it. It didn't come rushing back up the cut the way the men's stealings had come back to the scale. Nothing so plain as that. It just went. Quiet. Impossible. As if every grain of gold Crane had ever pulled out of Naylor and turned into some other thing was being called quietly to account wherever in the world it had got to. He rode down to the bank in Dahlonega to draw on his deposit, and the man behind the counter went white and went in the back and came out with the ledger and showed him. Crane's money was paid out. All of it. The book said so in Crane's own column. Paid in full, and there was no record of to whom, and no gold in the vault to answer for it, and the banker swore on his children he had never handed Crane $1, and the ledger swore he had. They near came to blows over a thing that neither one of them had done. Then the taxmen came. Years of county taxes, they said, never paid. Crane went roaring to his desk for his receipts. He was a man who kept every scrap of paper he ever signed, and the drawer was full of paper gone blank. Not lost. Blank. The ink just no longer on it. He paid them twice, and could not prove he had ever paid them once. And in the fine house, things went missing. His wife's wedding ring off the dish by the wash basin. The silver, a piece at a time. The gold watch his own father left him out of his vest pocket somewhere between the parlor and the porch. No window forced, no door sprung, no thief any soul ever laid eyes on, just gone, a little more every week. Everything that gold had ever bought him, leaving that house the way the vein had left the rock, like none of it had ever been there. Inside of a year, Aldous Crane was broke. Inside of 2, he was broken. The fine house went to the bank that had no record of his money. His wife went home to her people. And Crane, fat, satisfied Crane, with his thumbs in his vest, went thin and gray and wild about the eyes, and he took to walking up to the dead mine alone and standing at the mouth of it for hours, just looking into the dark. He got it fixed in his head that the gold had gone back down into the mountain, that it was down there yet, all of it, the dust and the coin and the ring and the watch, drawn back through the rock to the deep, wet bottom where we had left the old woman. I don't know if he was right. I've wondered it every day of my life since. But he believed it the way he believed every notion that ever served his wanting, and a ruined man with nothing left will believe anything that lets him pick up a tool one more time. He went up there with a keg of black powder and no sense left in him at all, going to blast his way down to the deep gallery and dig his fortune back out of the dark with his bare hands. I went up the mountain after him. I'll not lie to you and call it mercy. I went to stop a madman from bringing a whole mountain down on the county's heads. But he'd already set the charge by the time I reached him, and he would not hear me, and he lit it and ran in ahead of the smoke to be the first man down to his gold. The mountain came down. Not the way you'd ever plan a face to drop. The whole cut, the whole quarter-mile of it, folded shut from the bottom up, like Naylor had been waiting a long and patient while for nothing but the excuse. And it took Crane down in the middle of it, still running deeper, still calling out for his gold, in toward the dark and the water and the old woman we'd left lying there. I felt my own legs turn me back toward the light. I let them. I ran, and I did not stop till I was clear of the cut. And behind me, the mouth of that mine breezed out one long gust of cold air and rock dust, and then it was just a hillside. I put up the marker myself. Rockfall, 1859. It was the kind of answer a man could write on a board. I'm an old man now, a long way from Georgia, and I have never told this to a living soul. And I'm telling it tonight because I have finally come to understand the shape of my own life. I never went down in that mine after she died. I never carried off a grain of Crane's dried up gold. I told myself all these years that I was only a hired hand, that the wanting was Crane's and the killing was Crane's order, and I just did what a paid man does and walked away clean. But I was one of the 4. My hands were on her too, and I have watched my own life go the very way Crane's went, only slow, the mountain being patient with a smaller man. Every dollar I ever earned is run out through some hole I could never find. Every house I bought I lost. Things go missing from my rooms that no living hand took. I have been a careful man and a sober man, and I have come to the end of it with nothing, the same as Crane, drained out grain by grain across 60 years instead of 2. I used to call it bad luck. It is not bad luck. The toll don't stop being owed just because you stop paying it. She said it plain by the lantern, the last words out of her. And she'd have said it to me too, I expect, if I'd had the decency to ask. The mountain has taken everything I ever had now. There's just the one thing of mine left that it hasn't. It is the dark of the moon tonight. I can feel the pull, the same as I've felt it creeping at me for 60 years. Except tonight it isn't pulling at my purse, nor at my rooms. Tonight it's pulling at me. It's pulling south, toward a sealed mountain in Lumpkin County, Georgia. I helped take a thing that was never ours to take, and the mountain wants it home. They tell you a drought is a slow thing. It isn't. It's a thing that takes its time right up until the morning you walk down to the water and find the steeple looking back at you. I've lived on this ridge above Dray Lake my whole life. 71 years, and for 70 of them, that lake was just a lake. Good bass water. Folks come up from 3 counties to fish it. They don't know what they're floating over. Most of them never knew there was a town down there at all. There was. Mercy, it was called. My people were from it. My father was born in it, and his father preached in it. Mercy Chapel. White clapboard, a bell in the steeple my grandfather rung every evening of his life. In the winter of 1953, the power company dammed the Coley River at the Narrows, and the valley filled up over the course of a spring, and Mercy went under. The river took the houses first, then the road, then the chapel, the steeple last of all, the way a man drowning holds his hand up over the water until the very end. They moved the living, paid them out, trucked them up to the new towns on the ridges. And they moved most of the dead, dug up the churchyard, and carried the boxes up to higher ground. Most of them, not all. The state was paying by the grave, and there were a lot of poor graves in Mercy with no name and no kin left to fuss, and those they left them down in the dark under 200 feet of cold water and called it done. My grandfather signed the papers that let them flood his town. He didn't fight it, which surprised everyone because he'd fought everything his whole life. He signed it, and he made the men from the power company put one line in the agreement, and he stood over them while they wrote it. The water level of Dray Lake shall not at any time be permitted to fall below the top of the Mercy Chapel steeple. They thought he was a sentimental old man who couldn't bear to see the cross go under. They humored him. They wrote it in. And for 70 years it held, because there was always rain enough, and nobody ever had cause to let that lake get low. This summer there wasn't any rain. It started in May. By June the creeks were down to a trickle, and the corn was curling brown in the fields. By July the lake had dropped past every mark anybody living had ever seen. You could walk out on cracked mud where the boat ramp used to end. And one morning in the middle of all that heat I came down with my coffee, and there it was, out in the middle of the water, the tip of the steeple, black with rot and weed, breaking the surface for the first time since before I was born. I'll be honest, the first thing I felt wasn't fear. It was a kind of wonder. There was Mercy, coming back up to the light. I thought about my grandfather. I thought it was a sad and beautiful thing. I didn't remember yet what he used to say about the bell. The water kept dropping. There wasn't any rain in the forecast, not for weeks. Every morning, a little more of Mercy stood up out of the lake. A whole steeple, then the chapel roof, then the roof lines of the houses along what had been Main Street, all of it slick and black and hung with weed, stinking of the bottom of the world. The graveyard came up on the rise at the edge of town, the stones that were left leaning every which way in the mud, and the mud went out and out as the water pulled back, a gray, dead flat a half-mile wide where the lake used to be. People came to look, of course. You couldn't keep them away. They parked along the ridge road with their phones out, walked down onto the mud flat in the evenings to stand in the streets of a town that drowned before their grandparents were born. The county put up a sign that said, "Keep off the lake bed, unstable ground." Nobody paid it any mind. The bell rang for the first time on a Tuesday evening, just at dusk. I heard it from my porch, clear across the water. One stroke, slow. Then a long wait, longer than a bell should wait. Then another. There is nobody up in that steeple. I want to be plain about that. The chapel has stood under the lake for 70 years. The rope rotted off the bell before my mother was born. There is no man up there to ring it, and there is no wind that rings a bell one slow stroke at a time, with a count between like something keeping time. But it rang. I sat on my porch and I counted, and it rang 11 times, slow, and then it stopped, and the dark came down over the mud flat and over Mercy and over the gray, cracked nothing where my lake used to be. That was when I remembered what my grandfather said. He said he rung that bell every evening, not for the Lord and not for the town. He said he rung it to keep the valley quiet. He said there was something in the ground at Mercy, older than the chapel, older than the first cabin, that didn't care for the light or the noise of living people, and that the ringing kept it down where it belonged. And he said, I was a boy, I half listened. He said the day the bell stopped was the day you got up the ridge and you did not come back down. He didn't sign those papers to save his church. He signed them because 200 feet of cold water rings louder than any bell. The flood wasn't the end of Mercy, it was the lid. And the drought has taken the lid off. The bell rings every evening now. It started at 11 strokes. 3 nights later it was 9. Last night it was 6. It's counting down to something, and I don't know to what, and I'm afraid I do. The graves on the rise are open. I've seen them through my glasses from the porch. The few stones that were left and the dark holes in the mud in front of them, neat and empty, like whatever was in them simply got up and walked off across the flat. I don't go down to look closer. The young ones do. The Harmon boy went down 2 nights ago with his friends to see the drowned town by flashlight, and his mother's been on the ridge road every evening since, calling his name out over the mud, and the mud just lays there and doesn't answer. At dusk now, there are figures out on the flat, out past the chapel, where the water still stands in a shrinking gray pool. They don't move the way people move. They stand, and they face the ridge, and when the bell rings, they come a little closer to the shore than they were the night before. I've stopped counting how many. The county finally barred the lake road. Too late for the Harmon boy. Too late, I think, for the 4 or 5 others nobody's quite admitted are gone. They're saying it's the unstable ground, the mud, people wandering out and getting stuck and going under. That's the story, and it's a good one, and I hope to God they keep believing it. Because the truth is up on this ridge with me, and I'm too old to carry it much further. I have asked everyone I can find about the rain. The man on the television says the high pressure is locked in. He says it could be September before it breaks. He says it cheerful, like it's a thing about lawns and gardens. He doesn't know that every day without rain is another foot of water gone, and that there's a pool out there in the middle of Mercy getting smaller every morning, and that when it's gone, when that last gray water dries up off the bottom of the world, whatever my grandfather drowned will be standing on dry ground in the open air for the first time in 70 years. The bell rang 4 times tonight. I sat on my porch and I counted, and I looked out over the dead flat at the black steeple standing up against the last of the light, and I thought about my grandfather signing those papers with his jaw set, knowing exactly what he was buying us. 70 years. He bought us 70 years. I'd give anything for rain. I stand out in my yard in the evenings now, and I look up at that hard, empty sky, and I pray for it the way he must have prayed, ringing that bell every single night of his life. But the sky stayed clear. The bell rang 3 the next night, and 2 the night after that. Then yesterday the clouds came, real ones, gray and heavy, stacked up over the western ridge, and the whole county stood out in their yards with their faces turned up to them. I stood out in mine, and I prayed the way my grandfather must have prayed every evening of his life, ringing that bell into the dark. The clouds came right up to the lip of the valley. They sat there a while, and then the wind turned and carried them off south to fall on somebody else's drought, and the sky over Dray Lake went clear and hard and bright as the head of a nail. The pool in the middle of Mercy was gone this morning. All of it. Just cracked gray mud now, clear across the bottom of the valley, steaming a little in the heat. There is no water left down there to drop. The lid is off. I came out on the porch tonight, the way you'll keep going back to a thing even when you know better. And the flat was empty. All those shapes that had been gathering out by the last of the water, gone. Not sunk back down into the mud, just gone from the flat. And I made myself sit there and look at the long gray slope that runs up from the dead lake bed to my ridge, to the road, to my yard. The bell rang once. One stroke, slow, and it came across the dry valley closer than it has ever sounded, though the steeple has not moved 1 inch in 70 years. And then nothing. No second stroke. There is no count left now. There is nothing left to count down to. I have the truck keys in my hand. The tank is full. I'm going to drive up out of this valley, and I'm not going to look in the mirror, just like he told me when I was a boy and only half listening. Because down there, on that dark slope, somewhere between the drowned town and my porch, I can hear something coming up out of Mercy at last. Slow, unhurried, in no kind of rush at all. It has got all the time in the world now. 70 years my grandfather bought us. I used to think that was a long time. I want to be plain about who I am before I tell you the rest, because by the end you are going to wonder. I am not a dramatic man. I am 61 years old. I pay my taxes. I mow my lawn. I wave at my neighbors whether I feel like it or not. And I separate my recycling even though I have always suspected it all goes into the same hole in the ground. I tell you this so that when I say the people who run Crescent Ridge Estates are not, strictly speaking, people, you understand I am not reaching for a story. I am telling you what happened in the order it happened. I bought the house in March. 200 homes on a ridge that used to be second-growth woods and one old orchard nobody had picked in 50 years. They cleared all of it, cul-de-sacs, sidewalks, lawns so green they look printed. The kind of place where every third house has a little doorbell that watches the street. My realtor handed me the handbook at closing. Spiral-bound, 47 pages. I did not read it. I had lived in the world before, and I figured I knew what was in it. Mostly, I did. Trash cans out of sight by 7. Fences no higher than 6 feet. Paint from the approved ballot. 11 shades of beige and 1 gray that is also beige. Ordinary. Tiresome. Expected. Then I got to page 31. Page 31 is where it stops being a handbook. I am going to give them to you the way they are written. I am not softening anything. I took photographs in case one day I needed to prove to myself I had not dreamed it. Rule 14.3. Residents are not to acknowledge, wave at, or make eye contact with the family residing at 14 Crescent Court after sundown. This includes greetings, gestures of welcome, or leaving items upon their porch. Rule 14.7. Lawns must be maintained before the 3rd Wednesday of each month. Failure to comply will result in your lawn being maintained on your behalf. Do not observe the maintenance. Do not thank the crew. Do not leave out water. Rule 22.1. Should the streetlights along Crescent Ridge Drive turn from amber to blue, proceed indoors and draw every curtain. Do not attempt to find the source of any mowing heard during a blue light event. Rule 22.4. The community pool is open 6 in the morning to 9 at night. The pool is closed 9 at night to 6 in the morning. The pool is occupied 9 at night to 6 in the morning. These are not contradictory statements. Rule 31.6. The annual block party is held the second Saturday of June. Attendance is mandatory. Residents who do not attend will be visited. This is not a threat. This is scheduling. Rule 31.9. Do not dig below 18 inches anywhere on your property. If you already have, contact the board. Do not describe what you found to anyone but the board. I read all of that on my first night sitting on the floor eating cold pizza because the movers had not come yet. And I laughed. Of course I laughed. Some retired man with a label maker and a mean streak, I thought. The kind of thing the neighbors joke about over a fence. I have learned since that the people here do not joke about the handbook. They lower their voices the way you do in a church, or a hospital, or over a grave. I broke the first rule without meaning to. It was a Tuesday, little after sundown, and I was walking back from the mailbox. I passed 14 Crescent Court. Nice house. Same beige as mine. A family was out on the porch. Mother, father, 2 children. They looked pleasant. The mother lifted her hand and waved, and I waved back because I am a friendly man, and that is what friendly men do. The moment my hand went up, every porch light on the street went out at once. Not a power cut. The street lights stayed on. The windows stayed lit from inside. Only the porch lights, all of them, in the same instant, like they had taken a vote. The family at 14 was still waving. All 4 of them. The same wave, the same speed, the same smile, their hands going back and forth in perfect time, like they were being worked by one hand somewhere behind them. I put my own hand down. They did not. I went inside and locked the door, and about 10 minutes later, the porch lights came back on, all together, the way they had gone out. In the morning, there was a letter in my mailbox, Crescent Ridge letterhead, 1 line. Please review Rule 14.3 at your earliest convenience. No signature, no return address. I decided I had learned my lesson, and that was the end of it. Normal neighborhood, I told myself. Strict, but normal. So I let my lawn go. Not from laziness. I wanted to know what your lawn will be maintained on your behalf actually meant. The 3rd Wednesday came and went, and my grass got a little shaggy, nothing more, and I went to bed. I woke at 3 in the morning to a lawnmower. Not down the block, not a neighbor. A mower running at full throttle directly under my bedroom window, in the dark. I got up, I went to the glass, I had my hand on the curtain, and then I remembered. Do not observe the maintenance. I stood there with my fingers on that curtain for a long time, and I did not open it. The mowing went on for 45 minutes. It was thorough. I could follow it by sound alone, left to right, a little overlap, left to right, a little overlap, patient. At 3:47 it stopped, and there was a single knock at my front door, and I did not answer that either. In the morning, my lawn was cut so even it did not look real. Edges razor straight, long diagonal stripes pressed into it like a ball field. There was a bill in the mailbox, $375, Lawn maintenance, services rendered. Please do not dispute this charge. I paid it. I bought a mower that afternoon. I have not missed a Wednesday since. The first blue light event was a Thursday. I was watching television when the living room went wrong. The light coming through the curtains slid from warm to cold, from amber to a blue like the inside of a freezer. I knew the rule. I'd been here 6 weeks, and part of me still wanted to believe this was all some long, elaborate joke. So I pulled the curtain back 2 inches. The whole street was blue, that surgical, bloodless blue, and under it the beige houses had gone the color of old bone. And something was mowing my neighbor's yard. The right sound, exactly. The drone, the whisper of the blades. But there was nothing there. The grass was laying down in neat rows across his lawn, row after row, and there was nothing pushing it. I watched maybe 5 seconds. Then the blue light pulsed once, like a slow heartbeat, and every blade of cut grass stood straight back up at the same moment, like it had never been touched, like the mowing had been taken back. I closed the curtain. I have not looked during a blue light event since. I went for a swim one evening at 8:45, 15 minutes before close. The pool was lovely, heated, clean, those blue underwater lights that make you feel like you were swimming inside a movie. At 8:59, a whistle blew. There was no lifeguard. There was no one. The pool lights shut off, and I climbed out and toweled off and started for my car. Behind me, I heard a splash. I turned around. The pool was dark, and the surface was moving. Rings spreading out from the middle, the way water moves when something heavy has just gone under. Then another splash, and another, and another. 4, 5, 6 of them, and I could not see a single thing making them, only the sound of bodies going into the water and the rings running over each other until the whole surface was rough. A pool that was supposed to be closed. Then the underwater lights came on. The water was glass still, clear to the bottom, empty, but it sat 2 inches higher up the tile than it had when I climbed out. I went home. I do not go to the pool after dark. The block party was the second Saturday of June. I am not a joiner, and mandatory fun is my idea of a punishment, but by then I took the handbook seriously. Tables, streamers, a bouncy castle, burgers, a man playing music that managed to be too loud and too quiet at the same time. It looked like any block party in the country. I noticed 2 things. The family from 14 was there, standing at the edge of the crowd, all 4 of them, that same matched smile. Nobody spoke to them, nobody looked at them, and at the far end of the street there was a table nobody sat at, set for one. White cloth, real silver, a folded napkin, a glass of red wine, a plate of food still steaming in the June heat. I asked my neighbor Phil who the seat was for. Phil looked at me, and then at the table, and then at me again. "That is for the board," he said. I said I did not know we had a board. Phil took a long pull off his beer. "1 member," he said. I asked if he had ever met them. He said no. I asked if that was a good thing. He looked at me for a while, then he said, "Don't." And he walked off to find another beer. I looked back at the table. I had taken my eyes off it for the length of that conversation, a minute, maybe less. The wine glass was empty, the plate was clean, the napkin was folded beside it, and nobody at that party had walked toward it or away from it that I had seen. I wish I could tell you I did not dig. I was setting a fence post, and I had done it properly, filed the form, gotten the approval, and the approval came back with a line in bold. Reminder, post holes are not to exceed 18 inches in depth. The first 3 holes were 16 inches of clean clay. The fourth was in the back corner of the lot, right up against the tree line, the one strip of old woods they had left standing. At 18 inches, my shovel rang against something. Metal. The rule was right there in my head. Do not dig below 18 inches. And I dug below 18 inches because I was a grown man holding a shovel and my brain would not accept what it had hit. It was a handle, a brass door handle, set sideways into a flat wooden surface, a foot down in my own backyard. I cleared a square of it, old wood, a door laid face up under the dirt, and the handle was warm. 2 in the afternoon, the middle of July, and a brass handle buried under my yard was warm to the touch, like a hand had just let go of it from the other side. I covered it back over. I filled the hole. I set the post at 16 inches and poured the concrete, and went inside and poured myself something stronger. In the morning there was a letter. Thank you for contacting the board regarding Rule 31-9. Your inquiry has been noted. Please do not dig in the back corner again. The door is not for you. I never contacted the board. I have never contacted the board. But they knew. They always know. I have been at Crescent Ridge 14 months now. I mow every Wednesday. I do not wave at the family at 14 after dark. I do not look during the blue light. I do not swim after 9. I went to the block party, and I ate my hot dog, and I did not ask again about the table. I do not dig. I have learned to live inside the rules, the way you learn to live with a bad knee or a noise in your car you stop being able to hear. You quit asking what it is, you just adjust. But here is the thing that keeps me up. Last week I was clearing out the garage, and behind the water heater I found a second handbook. We scattered my father's ashes on the hill where he was born, under the old oak where he'd spent his last years sitting on a bench looking down at the valley. I thought that was the end of it, the kindest thing we ever did for him. I know better now. 4 generations of us lived in that valley, in the same white house under the same crooked oak. My father died in the room he was born in, the way his own father had, and when he passed there was never any question where he belonged. We carried him up the hill in a coffee can, that's the truth of it, an old coffee can, because it was what he'd have wanted. And we let him go in the place he loved most. The wind took some of them out over the valley, the farmland and the creek that caught the evening light, and I remember thinking, that's right, that's how it should be. A few weeks later, the flowers came. They came up in an arc beneath the oak, little orange blooms, the color of a coal at the bottom of a fire, the kind of thing you'd want to put in a jar on the kitchen table. They grew in a clean half circle, almost like somebody had laid them out, and I'll be honest, I let myself believe they'd come up right where his ashes fell. A man wants to believe a thing like that, a memorial that planted itself. I thought it was a mercy. I went up to clip a few of them, meaning to carry them down to somebody who'd know, the county extension man, the fellow who'll tell you what's eating your tomatoes. But the second the shears went through the first stem, the bloom died in my hand. Shriveled, brown, curled up dry as a dead leaf in January, and crumbled to dust before I'd even reached the truck. I tried another, and every one of them did the same. It was like they couldn't live cut loose from that dirt, like they were rooted to something down there, and being on it was the only thing holding them together. So I took a picture of them instead on my phone and carried that around. The county extension man studied it a long while, and then he looked at me funny and said he didn't know. 40 years he'd done that job. There wasn't a flower in the book that matched. Not the petals, not the way the stem was put together. He said it was put together wrong. I asked the old-timers. I asked Granny Pruitt, who was 90-some and had lived up that holler longer than the road had a name, and who knew every weed and root and bloom God ever made. She took one look at the picture and pushed my hand away, wouldn't even let it sit on her porch. She told me to burn what was on that hill, and burn it quick while it was still small. I thought she was just an old woman being an old woman. I went home. By the end of that week, the little flowers were waist-high bushes. The blooms covered them thick as a rash, that wrong orange, and they shouldn't have grown that fast. Nothing grows that fast. But there they were, swaying when there wasn't any wind to sway them. So I tried to be rid of them. I ran the old push mower up the hill and cut a row straight through the middle. The blades went through too easy, no fighting the stems at all. But before I'd finished that one pass, I looked back, and the row behind me was already coming up. I watched it happen, the stumps sprouting, the stems climbing, the blooms opening and fast forward, and by the time I reached the far end, the near end looked like I'd never touched it. I poured 2 50-pound bags of salt across the whole patch that night. In the morning it had spread another 10 feet. Salt only seemed to make it glad. The flowers came from the ashes, I knew that much. And the ashes came from the funeral home. So I called them. It rang and rang. No answer, no machine. I called the next day and the next. On the 4th day, I turned on the evening news and found out why nobody was picking up. The funeral home had burned to the ground, took the whole block with it. 5 people dead, the man and his wife who'd run the place 35 years among them. The news called it faulty wiring in an old building. I sat there looking at the smoke on the screen, and then I looked out the window at the hill and I thought, somebody else tried to burn it out too. After that, the flowers changed. The stems went thick and woody, more bramble than bush, and they put out thorns, long, curved, barbed things that always looked wet, like they'd been licked. And they started catching things. A crow first, tangled and dead, then sparrows, a rabbit, a raccoon that wandered too close and never wandered out. There was a smell off them by then, and it wasn't the rot you'd expect. It was sweet, almost like flowers, almost like the inside of that funeral home, that cloying chemical sweetness that's there to cover up what's underneath. The animals couldn't stay away from it. I'd watch from the kitchen window as a squirrel crept toward the brambles, nose working, drawn in. Some of them came back out, most didn't. I woke up one morning, and the bushes were 20 feet from the house. They'd come down the hill in the night, a tide of orange and wet thorn rolling toward the only home my people ever had. 2 deer lay dead at the edge of it, tangled up, their eyes gone glassy and flat. The brambles had reached my father's bench and swallowed it whole. I couldn't even see the wood anymore. And they were still coming, still spreading, still hungry. Mrs. Dawson came up the road on a Thursday. 70 years old, lived down the way my whole life, and she came carrying a casserole dish the way folks do when they don't know what else to give. She'd heard about Dad. I saw her car pull in from the kitchen window, saw her get out and smooth her dress and lift the dish off the seat. Then I saw her stop and look up the hill at the flowers and tilt her head a little, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear, and she started walking toward them. I was already running. I hollered her name. She didn't stop. She didn't even turn around. She walked up into those brambles like they weren't there, and the thorns caught her dress, and then her arms, and then her face, and she never made one sound. She just kept walking, deeper and deeper, until the blooms closed up behind her and she was gone. The casserole dish lay shattered at the edge of the patch. Tuna noodle. Still warm. That's when I understood there wasn't any saving it. I drove down to the gas station and filled every can and jug and milk carton I could find, 40 gallons, maybe 50, and I started at the house. I know how that sounds, the house my father was born in, his father before him, 4 generations of us living and dying inside those walls. But the roots were already under it. I could hear them at night, creaking up through the basement, pushing at the concrete. If I didn't burn the house was going to become part of the hill. So I soaked the walls, and I lit the match, and I stood in the yard and watched my whole childhood go up. Then I went up the hill. The thorns reached for me the whole way, swiping at my arms and legs while I splashed the gasoline. That sweet smell was something terrible by then, sweet and copper and rot all at once, and underneath all of it something older, something that had been down in that valley a long, long time before my father's ashes ever touched it. I saved the oak for last, poured the last of the gas around the trunk where his bench used to be, and I said I was sorry, and I don't to this day know who I was saying it to. My father, the land, the 4 generations I was about to wipe off it, maybe all of them. I lit the match. That fire burned for 3 days. It should have burned out the first night, should have run out of fuel, should have been smothered by the trucks. But it kept on, and the flames were wrong. Too orange, too bright, moving in ways fire doesn't move. And there was a sound in it, not screaming, more like a long sigh, like something was finally being let go. The fire department gave up after the second day. They said they'd never seen the like. They said the ground itself was burning, like the soil was the fuel. When it was finally out, there was nothing left. No flowers, no thorns, no house, no oak, no bench, no dad. Just ash, all over again. The truth about the funeral home came out that winter. The cremations they'd charged for, a lot of them never happened. They'd been mixing folks together for years, remains from dozens of people, maybe hundreds, ground up and parceled out to grieving families who never knew the difference. Which meant what I carried up that hill in a coffee can and let go on the wind was never just my father. It was everyone. All of them, all those people, all those lives ground together and scattered on my family's hill and fed to whatever had been waiting down in that valley for the right kind of offering. I don't know what grew from those ashes. I don't know if it was the mixing that woke it or if it was something that had always been down there, patient, waiting on a meal that big. I don't know if burning it was enough. But some nights I think about Mrs. Dawson walking into those flowers with her casserole dish, and the way the thorns opened up to let her in, almost gentle, almost glad. And I wonder if she's still in there somewhere under the ash, still walking, still following that sweet smell down. 300 miles from here, a fire truck goes screaming down a quiet street, and a little girl in her front yard stops to watch it pass. She loves the noise and the lights. When it's gone around the corner, she turns back to her game, and something catches her eye, down by the fence where her grandmother's ashes got scattered in the spring. "Mama," she calls toward the house. "Mama, come look at the flower. It's orange, like my dress." You've probably seen the Frogman by now. He's a t-shirt. He's a festival with a bagpiper and a parade. There's a bill in the State House to make him the official cryptid of Ohio, and people laugh about that the way you laugh about something you've decided can't hurt you. I grew up in Loveland on the Little Miami River, and I'm going to tell you what my brother saw down there in the summer of 1972, because he carried it for 51 years, and he made me swear not to tell it until he was gone. He's gone now. So come in and sit down and let me tell it the way he finally told me. We were boys that summer. I was 11, Danny was 13, and the whole town was lit up because a police officer named Ray Shockey had seen something on the road by the river in the middle of the night. You can still find what he said. He was driving the river road around 1 a.m. when something crossed in front of his cruiser. Crouched, then it stood up, about 3 or 4 feet of it, and looked at him over the guardrail before it went down the embankment toward the water. He said it had a face like a frog, or a lizard. He was not a man who told stories. He went back later, in the daylight, embarrassed, and tried to make it make sense, and never could. To us that summer, it wasn't embarrassing. It was the best thing that had ever happened. Every kid in Loveland was down on that river looking for the Frogman. We had flashlights and BB guns and an unshakable certainty that we were going to be the ones to find him. Most nights we found mud and mosquitoes and each other. Danny and I had a spot. Down under the old bridge where the river ran shallow over a gravel bar, there was a place the bullfrogs gathered so thick you could hear 'em from the road. On a summer night, that stretch of the Little Miami was the loudest place in the county. Frogs and crickets and the river itself, all of it going at once. A wall of sound you stopped hearing after a while, the way you stop hearing a fan. The night it happened, we'd snuck out after our folks were asleep. It was late, later than we'd ever stayed out, and we came down the path to the gravel bar with one flashlight between us, Danny ahead because Danny was always ahead. And the frogs stopped. Not all at once, the way they do when you scare them and they go quiet for a second and start back up. They stopped in a line. I want you to understand what I mean because it's the part I've never been able to shake. The frog song went quiet, starting from the far end of the bar and coming toward us, frog by frog, like a hand closing a row of switches one at a time. We stood at the top of the path and listened to the silence come across the river toward us. By the time it reached the water in front of us, the loudest place in the county had become the quietest place I've ever stood in my life. Danny put his arm out and stopped me. He didn't say anything. He just clicked off the flashlight. There was a moon that night, half of one, enough to put a gray shine on the water. And out on the gravel bar, maybe 40 feet from us, something was standing at the edge of the river. I'm going to tell you what I saw, and then I'm going to tell you what Danny saw. Because they are not the same, and the difference is the whole reason he never went near that river again. What I saw from the top of the path was a shape, upright, smaller than a man. Danny's height maybe, no taller, but wrong in the shoulders, wrong in how it stood, too still in a way that nothing alive is still. It was the pale gray of a fish belly, and the moonlight ran off it like it was wet, and it was bent slightly forward over the water with its arms down at its sides. It wasn't moving. It was looking at the river, at the shallow water running over the gravel, the way a man looks down into a well. That's all I saw. A wet, gray shape bent over the water in the silence the frogs had left behind. And it was enough that I have not gone swimming in a river in 51 years. Danny saw the rest. He was 10 feet ahead of me down the path, closer, with younger eyes and the angle I didn't have. And what he told me on the last night of his life, in a hospice bed with the oxygen hissing in his hand cold in mine, was this. It wasn't looking at the river, it was looking at something in the water in front of it. And the something in the water was moving. Slow, just under the surface, pale, the size of a child. And the thing on the bank reached down with both of those long arms into the shallow water, gentle, the way you'd lift something you didn't want to wake. And it brought up another one, smaller, the same wet gray. It held it up out of the river, and it turned it over in its hands, and Danny said, and this is the part that made an old man cry 51 years after the fact, he said it was tender. That whatever it was, it held the small one the way our own mother held us. That it wasn't a monster doing a monster's work. It was a parent, lifting its young out of the water in the dark, in the one stretch of river where it thought nothing was watching. And then it turned its head, and it looked up the bank, straight at the spot where Danny stood, and it saw him seeing it. Danny said it didn't make a sound. It didn't rush them. It simply lowered the small one back into the black water. Both of them slid down off the gravel without a splash, and the river closed over the place where they'd been. And then the frog started up again, far into the bar first, coming back across the water toward us switch by switch, until the night was loud again, and we were two boys standing in the dark with our hearts going like rabbits, alone on the path, like nothing had ever been there at all. We never told anyone, not our parents, not the other kids, not Ray Shockey, who'd have understood better than anybody. We ran home and we got into our beds, and in the morning Danny was different in a way I couldn't name at 11 and understood completely by the time we were grown. He'd lost something down on that gravel bar, not his nerve, his distance. The comfortable distance you keep between yourself and the things you'd rather believe aren't real. Because here's what he told me at the end, the thing he'd been carrying. He said the worst part was never the fear. The worst part was that he understood it. That for 1 second, looking at that wet gray thing holding its child up out of the river, he had felt the thing you were not supposed to be able to feel toward a monster. He'd felt that it loved something, and that it had a whole life down there, under the water, in the dark, going about its tenderness in a town that put it on a t-shirt, and that we had walked down a path at the wrong hour and seen a private thing, a family thing, that was never meant for us. It's not a story, Tom, he said to me, the last clear thing he ever said. That's why I couldn't tell it. People want the frogman to be a joke or a monster. He's neither. He's just somebody who lives down there. And we saw him with his kid. Then he closed his eyes, and the machines did their quiet work. And sometime before morning, my brother let go of the thing he'd held since we were boys and passed it to me. So I'll tell you what I think, for whatever an old man's thinking is worth. I think there's more down in that river than the festival knows about. I think it was there before the road, before the bridge, before the town with its parade. I think Ray Shockey saw a father out walking the bank one. There's a circle on the hill above my house where the grass has never grown. Not in my life, not in my father's, not in his father's before him. And every soul who has ever come up to wonder at it has wondered at exactly the wrong thing. They come for the grass. That's what catches the eye, and that's the thing they can't let go of once they've seen it. A perfect ring, 30 foot across, struck on a green hillside like it was drawn with a compass the size of a barn, and inside the line not a blade grows. Not grass, not clover, not a weed, not so much as moss in a wet year. bare red dirt, packed hard and quiet, and a line so clean you could lay a string along it, where the green stops dead and the bare begins. So they study the grass. Of course they do. It's the strange thing, the thing the eye snags on, and a man sees a riddle and he wants to solve the part of it that's showing. They've been coming up that hill with their questions as long as there's been a road to bring 'em. The county agent, years back, a man from the state, church people once who didn't care for it and wouldn't say why, and a few summers ago a whole crew from the university, young people in good boots with little flags and canvas bags and machines in padded cases, and they were up there the better part of a week. And every last one of them was concerned with the same thing. Why won't the grass grow? They sampled the grass at the edges. I watched them do it. They cut little plugs of sod from just outside the line, where the green still held, and from just inside where it gave out, and they laid them in numbered bags. They scraped the dirt from around the rim and ran it through their machines, and they found their answer, and they were so pleased to have it. Salt, they told me. The soil along that ring carries salt. Saline, the young woman said, many times over the ground around it. And salt is death to grass. And there is your mystery solved, sir. An old brine seep, most likely. A salt lick the cattle used to death a century back. Natural as rain. And I poured them coffee and I let them drive back down the mountain happy. Because they were right about the salt. That's the part that has always sat heavy on me. There is salt in that ground. More salt than any seep on God's earth ever laid down. They were dead right about the what of it. They just never once asked the right question. They spent a whole week on their knees at the edge of that circle, fussing over the grass, sampling the rim, and not one of them, not one, ever thought to put a spade in the middle. If they had, if any single one of them had walked to the dead center of that ring and dug down, 4 foot, maybe a hair better, they would have found what the salt is there for. They would have found what the ring is holding. And if they had known the truth of what they were looking at, they would not have disturbed that circle for anything in this world. A grass not growing was never the mystery. A grass not growing is just what ground does when it's made to hold a thing like that. It's the smoke. They all came running up my hill to study the smoke, and went home satisfied they'd explained the fire. The circle is a binding. The salt is what binds it, and 4 foot down in the dead center of that ring, there is something my family has kept bound since before there was a county here to give this hill a name. Something that has been working, slow and patient and without ever once resting, to get out. My father took me up to the ring the spring I turned 10 and showed me how it's kept. He had a little wagon for it and the coarse salt in sacks, the kind they used to pack meat in. Twice a year, he told me, once when the ground thaws and once before the first hard freeze, you haul the salt up and you lay it over the whole of that circle, edge to center, heavy over the center, and you do not miss a year, and you do not miss by much. He never told me what was under it. I asked. My whole life I asked, and all I ever got back was the same 3 things, in the same flat voice like a man saying grace. Keep the ring whole, keep the salt fresh, and whatever else you do in this life, you do not dig. I hated that chore the way a boy hates any chore he can't see the sense of. I thought it was the kind of thing old hill families carry like a limp, a thing you keep doing because stopping feels unlucky long after anybody remembers the why of it. And when the college crew came and tested the dirt and told me kindly that there was nothing up there but salt, I felt like the last fool on the mountain. Generations of us hauling salt up a hill to keep a salty patch salty. So the year after my father passed, when there was nobody left alive to be disappointed in me, I didn't go up. I'd like to tell you a storm kept me, or a bad back. The truth is, I just didn't do it. The thaw came and I looked up at that bare ring from my porch and I thought, you are a grown man, and the college told you it's only salt. And I let the whole spring go by and never hauled a sack. By midsummer, the green had crept in. Just a fuzz of it at first, all along the inside of the line, the first growth that circle had seen in 200 years, and I felt, God help me, almost proud. See, I thought, it grows. It was always just salt, and I'm the one with the sense to quit. Then late that summer came the smell. Off the hill of an evening, when the wind turned, not rot, not a dead animal, nothing so honest as that. Sweeter, older, like the inside of a root cellar shut up wet for 100 years. It came down off that ring and I stood on my porch and breathed it and told myself it was the creek running low. And then one morning the middle of the circle had sunk. A dish in the dirt, dead center, a foot across and a few inches deep, where the packed ground had been flat and hard my whole life. And the green at the edges was coming ranker now, dark and wet-looking, even in the dry. I went up to it. First time in my life I ever stood at that line with the salt not fresh. And while I stood there looking at that sunk place in the center, it moved. The dirt rose, slow, the few inches it had dropped, and settled back, soft, the way a man's chest does, once. Like something a long way down had turned in its sleep and was working itself by inches toward turning over again. I salted that ring before the next sunrise. I went up in the dark with a lantern and a load heavier than my father ever hauled, and I laid it on edge to center, and I poured it over that sump place until the dish was a white mound, and I stood there in the gray dawn, shaking like a leaf, an old man with an empty sack, and I listened. It went still. The green browned off inside the week. The smell left the wind. The center hardened flat again by the fall. And I have not been one day late with the salt in the 11 years since, and I will not be, not while I can get myself up that hill. I don't know what's down there. I want to say that plain because a man who tells you he knows is lying. I never dug. No keeper of that ring ever dug, because the first thing we learn down in the blood is that you do not dig, you salt. Salt holds it. Salt has always held it. You salt meat so it won't turn. You salt a field in the oldest tellings when you mean for nothing ever to rise from it again. Salt was never for the dead. The dead lie quiet on their own. Salt is for the other kind, the kind that won't. And here is why I'm finally setting it down in my 79th year for whoever this reaches. I can keep the salt fresh as long as my legs will take me up that hill. What I cannot do is keep the world from wanting to dig. The university wrote again. They want to come back, they said, with ground radar to characterize the anomaly. And if they run that machine across my hill and it shows them a shape 4 foot down in the dead center of that ring, curled up about the size of a sleeping man, they are not going to leave it lie. No man who finds a thing like that ever walks away from it. They will be so careful and so proud and so certain it's a grave, a relic, a discovery. They will lift my salt and put their spades to the center of that ring, and they will let out the very thing that 200 years of my people salted down into the dark. And my son in Denver thinks his daddy is a superstitious old man with a bare spot in his pasture. He'll inherit this hill, and someday after I'm gone, a letter from some university is going to land in his box, and there will be nobody left who stood at that line with the salt run thin and felt the ground draw a breath. Nobody to tell him, keep the ring whole, keep the salt fresh, and don't you ever, ever let them dig. He'll think it's a bald spot in a field. He'll let them. That's why I've written it out. So there's a thing he can hold in his hand after and read and maybe believe a little, the way I never quite believed my father until the ground itself reached up and taught me. It's spring now, past time. The wagon's loaded down by the gate, the bags are heavy, and my knees have no use for that hill anymore. But every soul who ever climbed up there was afraid of the wrong thing. They were all afraid the grass wouldn't grow. I lie awake afraid of the day somebody finally gets their wish and finds out why. You keep the ring whole, you keep the salt fresh, and you do not dig. I was heading home after a 14-hour shift. About 8 o'clock. Summer, so the light had dawned, soft and gold, but I still had a good hour before real dark. Home was 60 minutes out on a good day, and this had not been a good day. That's when the barricade lit up. Detour ahead. Those sad little yellow lights blinking at me like they felt bad about it. Great road work. When the only thing I wanted in the whole world was to be home with my shoes off. My phone chirped and rerouted itself. Take your next left, it said, real sure of itself. Wasn't much of a left to take, just a gap in the corn, a road with no sign, or if it had one, the weeds had eaten it. But the little blue line said that was the way, so I took it, my truck dropping off the pavement onto gravel. You know how some roads feel forgotten? Flat, narrow, no center line, corm standing tall on both sides like walls. The kind of road where you don't pass anybody because there's nobody out there to pass. That's where the detour put me. Figured it'd spit me back onto the highway in a few miles. I figured a lot of things that night. I'd been on it maybe 10 minutes when I got the feeling. Can't explain it any better than this. I felt like I'd already done it. Not been there, done it. I'd come up on a bend and know it was coming a half second before my lights found it. Knew the dip before my stomach dropped into it. Deja vu, I guess, except it didn't pass the way deja vu's supposed to. It just sat there, humming, getting louder. Told myself I was wrecked from the shift. 14 hours will do that. I'd been telling myself a lot of things lately. And the light wasn't going. That's the part that nags at me now. It had been 8 o'clock for a while. That hour of gold I had should have been most of the way burned down to dark by then. But it held. Same soft, dying, golden, almost dusk, like somebody'd put a thumb on the clock. That's about when I passed the Buick. First time I barely clocked it. Blue, old, coming the other way. Up high the truck like I was, I looked down into it as it passed. A woman at the wheel, hands at 10 and 2. Something winked in her windshield, a little flash of light, there and gone, and I didn't think a thing of it. We did that little whoomp, 2 cars do, passing close, and she was gone before she'd cleared my mirror. A couple minutes later, I passed her again. Different car, I told myself, has to be. Another old Buick. People out here drive these till the wheels fall off. And I was tired. 14 hours will make you see things. Then, the flash. That same little wink off her windshield, there and gone. This time I caught what threw it. A small silver cross, swinging from a rearview mirror, catching the last of that low gold sun. The same flash, the same cross, the same car. And that was the thing I couldn't make sit right. The road ran dead straight. No crossroads, no driveways, nowhere she could have slipped behind me and doubled back to come at me nose first. There was no version of it that worked. It couldn't happen. It just kept happening. Third time she was looking at me, not a glance, looking. Turned in her seat as we passed, face pale, eyes tracking me like she was trying to place where she knew me from. Felt it go right through me. I leaned on the gas. Fourth time, she was scared. Mouth going, saying something I couldn't hear, head shaking, no, no, no. Fifth time, she had her hand flat on the glass, hitting it, screaming at me through a window that wouldn't let out a sound. And those eyes, she wasn't angry, she was begging me. And it wasn't just her by then. A possum, dead on the shoulder. I passed it 3 separate times, same possum, same stretch of gravel. The radio kept snapping back to the start of the same song, over and over. The clock on my dash read 8:11, and it had read 8:11 long enough that I'd quit looking at it. I was going in a circle. We both were. The same few miles, around, and every lap she came a little more apart, and so was I, if I'm being honest. And the part I kept shoving down was how familiar she was getting. Not her face, I could never hold her face. Something underneath it, the way she sat. That little cross swinging. I've got a cross like that, hanging off my mirror. Right now. I couldn't take it. The screaming I couldn't hear. The same few miles, that face coming apart in my windshield again and again. I just wanted it to stop. So the next time the Buick came at me, the next time she filled the glass, pounding it, I'd jerk the wheel right at her, to scare her off, make her swerve, make it end. I didn't decide it, my hands just did it. She overcorrected. The back end came around on the gravel. The car left the road, and there it was, the big oak, the one I passed every time I passed her car, and she hit it. I watched the hood fold around the trunk through my side window as I went past. I didn't stop, didn't even slow. I just drove, hands locked, eyes front, telling myself I hadn't seen it, hadn't done it. There was nothing back there to see. And then I made myself look in the mirror. There was the oak, black against that gold that still wouldn't go. No car, no wreck, no steam, no woman, just the tree and the empty road running out smooth behind me like nothing had ever happened on it, like nothing ever could. I let out a breath that shook on the way out. I'd imagined it. I was tired. I was so tired, and I'd dreamed the whole thing up between 1 mile marker and the next. The corn was thinning now. There was blacktop ahead, a real road, and the gold was finally starting to bleed down toward dark. It was over, and then I saw them. Those sad little yellow lights. Detour ahead. My phone chirped and rerouted itself, real sure of itself. Take your next left. And behind me, in the mirror, the gold wasn't going anywhere at all. I've taken that left more times than I can count. I know that now. Somewhere, I think I've always known it. The road, the corm, that feeling 10 minutes in that I've done this before. Now a brown Lincoln was coming at me, older model. An old man at the wheel, both hands at 10 and 2, eyes on the road, calm as a Sunday. He passed me in that little whoomp and was gone in my mirror before I could place him. A couple minutes later, I passed him again. He doesn't know it yet. Right now, he's just a tired old man on a long drive home. An hour of daylight left that's never going to spend itself. In a minute or two, he'll pass me again, and he'll tell himself it's a different truck, A lot of black trucks out here. Then you'll pass me a third time, and a fourth, on a road dead straight with nowhere to double back, and somewhere in there it'll stop being a different truck and start being the same one, coming at him head on over and over, and he'll come apart, same as I did. Somewhere around the fifth time, he's got his palm flat on the glass, screaming through a window I'll never hear. My hands already know what they're going to do. I keep my eyes on the line. It doesn't help. It's never once helped. I've done this before. I'll do it again. My wife has taken to calling me in from the yard again every evening since last fall. That wouldn't trouble most folks, except Ruth has been dead 3 years. I want to start with the ordinary part, because the ordinary part is what makes the rest of it true. For 31 years, Ruth and I lived in this house at the foot of Coker Ridge, with the garden out back and the woods coming right up to the fence line behind it. And for 31 years, every single evening, when the lights started going down behind the ridge, she'd step out onto the back porch and call me in. I'd be out there past dark sometimes, fussing with the tomatoes, and she'd put her hands on the rail and call across the yard the same way every time. "Come in now, old man. It's getting dark." Old man. She started calling me that when I was 30, and she was 28, and she never stopped, not in 31 years. "Come in now, old man. It's getting dark." I heard it so many thousands of evenings, I quit hearing it at all, the way you quit hearing a clock. It was just the sound the end of a day made. She passed 3 years ago this spring, in her sleep, which is more mercy than most of us get. And the evenings after that were the quietest, emptiest thing I've ever lived through, because the light would go down behind Coker Ridge, and nobody called me in. I'd stand out in that garden in the dark like a fool, waiting on a voice that wasn't coming. And then I'd go in by myself and sit in a house that didn't have her in it. The first time I heard her again was last fall. I was out at the fence at dusk, and from back in the trees, soft, far off, I heard it. "Come in now." Just that much. And I will tell you the truth. My old heart near to stopped, not from fear, but from a kind of terrible hope. Because for half a second it was her. It was Ruth's voice come across the yard the way it had 10,000 times. Then my mind caught up to me, and I told myself it was the wind in the hollow, or a whippoorwill, or an old man who misses his wife so bad he started hearing her in the trees. I went inside. I didn't sleep much. It came again the next evening, clearer, and the evening after that, clearer still. And that's the thing I want you to understand, the thing that took the hope right out of me and left something colder in its place. It was getting better. Every evening, that voice out of the tree line had a little more of her in it. The first night it was just the words, then it found the tune of her, the way she let "now" run down at the end. Then it found that little catch she had in her throat, the one she got when she'd been calling a while and I hadn't come. Whatever was back in those woods, it wasn't remembering Ruth, it was practicing her. I remembered then what my grandfather told me when I was a boy. He took me to the edge of these same woods one evening, and he told me there was a thing that lived in them, older than the trees, older than the first cabin in this hollow. He said it didn't have a shape of its own, so it borrowed. He said it would call to you in a voice you loved and trusted from in among the trees, and if you were fool enough to answer it, or worse, to go to it, you would not come back out. He had a name for it. I won't say the name. He told me the only rule that ever mattered out here, and he made me say it back to him twice. You do not answer the woods. And whatever you hear in there, whoever you hear, you do not go in after it. I thought it was a story to keep a boy out of the deep woods. I know better now, so I stopped going out at dusk. I'd bring the tomatoes in early, and I'd shut the back door, and I'd sit in the kitchen with the radio on so I wouldn't have to hear it. But you can't not hear a thing you're listening that hard not to hear. And every evening, right as the light failed, it would start up out of the tree line. Come in now, old man. Old man. That was the night it got the name. And that was the night I knew, all the way down, that it wasn't memory, and it wasn't grief. Nobody on this earth called me old man but Ruth. Not my mother, not a soul. There was no way under heaven for a thing in the woods to know that name, unless it had heard her say it. And then I understood the worst part of all of it. Ruth loved those woods. 31 years, every evening before she called me in, she'd take her own little walk up along the tree line, just to the big leaning hickory and back. Talking to herself, talking to me, talking to the Lord. For 31 years she walked the edge of those trees and said my name and called me old man, out loud, in the dark, with that thing not 20 feet away in the black, listening. It didn't take her in 3 nights last fall. It took her a lifetime ago, a little at a time, while we thought we were just living our lives. By the time she died, it already had every bit of her it needed. It started coming closer after that. The first nights the voice came from deep in, back where the trees go black. Then it was at the tree line. Then some evenings it was right up at the fence, close enough that I could hear it take a breath between the words, and Ruth never needed a breath to call across that little yard. It never crossed the fence. It never came out into the open ground where the last of the light still sat. I don't think it can. I think the rule my grandfather gave me runs both ways. It can't come to me, out here in the open. It can only call. So it calls. And it isn't just her anymore. About a month ago, a second voice started in. My mother, 20 years in the ground, calling me by the name she used when I was small. Then a third I didn't know at first, a woman, and then I placed her. That was the Tatum woman, Coy Tatum's wife, who died the winter before my Ruth, which told me everything about what happened to Coy. He lived 2 hollers over. He lost his wife, and then that next spring he just wasn't around anymore, and they found his good coat hung up neat on a branch at the edge of his woods, and never found one other thing of him. I used to wonder how a grown man walks off into the trees and never comes out. I don't wonder now. I know exactly the voice that called him in there, and I know he was glad to hear it. So that's where I am, an old man, alone, in a boarded-up house at the foot of Coker Ridge, with the radio on loud, and a yard full of my own dead calling me in from the dark every single evening, and getting a little closer and a little more right every night. But I have to tell you the last thing, the thing from 2 nights ago that I can't get shut of. 2 nights ago, at dusk, the voices out of the tree line went quiet, all of them at once. And after a while, a new one started up. And this one wasn't Ruth, and it wasn't my mother, and it wasn't poor Coy's wife. It was me. My own voice, calling my own name, out of the trees. It's done practicing me now. It has learned me the way it learned her. Every night of my life I've spent out by these woods, it's been listening. And I understand what that means. It means I'm finished being the one it calls to. Some evening, before too long, somebody in this holler is going to lose the person they love most in this world. And they're going to be standing out in their yard in the dark hollow with missing them, and they are going to hear me calling them in from the trees. And here's the shameful truth of it, a thing I've never said out loud because there is nobody to say it to. In the 3 years since I put Ruth in the ground, before that voice ever came out of those woods, you know how many people spoke to me? The girl who rings up my groceries, the boy who reads the meter. Thank you. Have a nice day. 12 words in a week, and never once my name. Not one living soul has called me anything at all in 3 years. That thing in the trees calls me old man. Every single evening. It knows my name, and it wants me to come in, and it is the only thing left in this world that does. You sit alone in a quiet house long enough, with nobody coming up the road and nobody calling, and you learn that being wanted by something is its own kind of hunger, even when you know what the something is, even when you know exactly what it'll cost. So when I tell you I'd be done with all of it tonight if I were a stronger man, understand what I mean. It isn't only that I miss her, it's that out there past the fence in the dark is the one voice in 3 years that is glad to hear me come. Last evening, just at dark, it used her voice again, and it had her whole at last, every last bit of her. And it said the whole thing, soft and patient across the yard. Come in now, old man, it's getting dark.